News of the Times. Love turned deadly. 8 true crime cases of obsession, betrayal and murder from 1856 to 1926. Tonight we're travelling through 70 years of history from 1856 to 1926 to explore 8 true crime cases where love did not conquer all, but instead led to obsession, betrayal, and ultimately death. These are the stories that gripped Victorian and Edwardian Britain. Jealous lovers, broken promises, desperate escapes, and crimes carried out behind closed doors, all in a world where reputation meant everything and passion could quickly turn lethal. We begin in Paris with a crime so shocking that thousands queued up outside the morgue just to glimpse the victim for themselves. Cases 2 and 3. 2 women, 40 years apart, living completely different lives, yet each walks the same fatal path. In rural Ireland, a young wife caught in a violent marriage stands beside her mother in the dock, accused of killing that shocked the county. In Oxford, a broken romance festers into obsession, anonymous letters, and a gunshot that shakes the university to its core. 2 Catherines, 2 eras, 1 devastating pattern. Cases 4 and 5. Our next 2 cases brings us 2 love stories, each beginning with hope and each ending in blood. In Preston, a young couple preparing to sail for a new life in America end their final evening in a hotel dining room with a single gunshot that shocks the town. 14 years later in Eastbourne, a pair of runaway lovers lock themselves in a room, leaving behind wounds, letters, and a mystery that still refuses to settle. When affection curdles into possession, the line between love and violence all but disappears. Case 6. A doctor's wife and her closest friend are found lying side by side in a bedroom, both dead from prussic acid, and the husband has vanished. What begins as a suspected pact quickly unravels into a tangle of secrets, whispers, and unexplained injuries. And when a second death 5 weeks earlier rises back to the surface, the entire case tilts into something far more disturbing than anyone expected. Nothing in New Cross was quite what it seemed. Cases 7 and 8. What happens when the courts are asked to weigh passion against justice? In France, a betrayed wife kills her unfaithful husband and is astonishingly acquitted, to the outrage of England. In Canterbury, a wealthy Etonian sets a trap for his wife's lover, and the resulting shooting becomes one of the most sensational trials of the decade. 2 killings, 2 juries, and 1 dangerous idea, the unwritten law. Each case you'll hear tonight was once front page news. Each raised questions about guilt, motive, and the boundaries of love. And each reveals something about the societies in which they unfolded. From the pressures placed on Victorian women to the dangers of scandal in the academic world, to young couples trapped by expectations they could not meet. So, settle in with your favourite beverage as we explore a world of love, passion, and deadly murder. This is Love Turned Deadly. 8 extraordinary and often heartbreaking stories spanning the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Let's begin. Case 1. The Paris beheading case, the shocking murder that gripped France in 1856. In our first case, we travelled to Paris in the summer of 1856 to a quiet lodging house where a porter climbed the stairs before dawn and met a man carrying the naked, headless body of a young woman across his shoulders. What followed became one of the most sensational crimes of the decade. A terrible mix of obsession, jealousy, panic, and a botched attempt at dismemberment that horrified even the Parisians, who were not easily shocked. Newspapers in England called it a frightful murder. Crowds in Paris rushed to the morgue by the thousands, desperate to see the unidentified victim for themselves, and all the while the killer, a quiet office clerk named Poirier, vanished into the city. This is the story of the Rue de la Philadelphie murder, a crime of passion, a failed escape, and a macabre theatre of death that captivated all of France. Generally, stories from France would receive a small paragraph. This story made all the papers in England. From the Morning Post, the 7th of August, 1856, frightful murder. The quarter of the Faubourg Saint-Martin had just been the scene of a frightful murder. About 4 o'clock in the morning before last, the attention of the porter of a house in the Rue de la Philadelphie was excited by the noise in one of the upper stories. Fearing that some of his lodgers were about to effect a clandestine removal, he got up and went out of his lodge to see what was going on. Scarcely had he ascended a few steps of the staircase when he met a man who is a clerk in a public administration and occupied a room above, bearing on his shoulders the naked body of a woman with the head cut off. On seeing the porter, and alarmed at the cry which that person raised, the man threw down the body, ascended hastily towards his room, and jumped out of the window on the second floor into the street. The upper part of a shop window on the ground floor broke his fall, and he came onto the foot pavement without having received any injury, and he ran off as fast as he could towards the Faubourg Saint-Denis. Few persons were in the street at this hour, and no one consequently stopped him. Information having been sent to the Commissary of Police, that functionary was soon on the spot, accompanied by a medical man. It appears from the preliminary investigations that the now missing man, about 2 years ago, fell violently in love with a young girl with whom he had resided in the house for more than a year, but she one day disappeared. After searching for her for several months, he at length discovered the fugitive, but notwithstanding his earnest entreaties, she refused to renew her acquaintance with him. It is thought, however, that on Saturday she had come to his room, and that during the night the horrible crime was perpetrated, of which the circumstances are as yet but very imperfectly known. The room, on its being entered, was found in the greatest disorder, and everything covered with blood. The head was found in a pail. It is supposed that the missing man must have accomplished the decapitation with a razor while his victim was asleep. The age of the girl is considered by the medical men to be about from 23 to 25, but nothing has yet been found to prove her identity. The body was consequently removed to the morgue. It is supposed that the now missing man, believing that everyone was asleep in the house, would have carried the body into the street and there left it, thus giving an idea that the murder had been effected in the public road. But the waking of the porter disconcerted his plans. How he intended to manage with the head is by no means clear. The police are making a strict search for him, but no clue to him has been had. The following are additional details. The murderer's name is Poirier. His age is 35, and he was employed as office porter by the Société Immigration Franco-Américaine, whose offices are at that address. On Saturday, the chief employees of the company, on the termination of the business of the day, said that they would go into the country in the evening and stop till Monday, and they left him in charge of the offices. In the evening he went out, and after stopping some time returned with a young and pretty woman, who went upstairs with him, the concierge making no objection. In the night, the concierge, as already stated, was awakened by a strange noise on the staircase. He got up and found Poirier dragging down by the legs the body of a woman with her head cut off. The chemise of the victim was tied over the neck, probably to prevent the effusion of blood. The concierge, horrified, cried for his wife to come to him, and armed himself with an old sword which he possessed as a retired soldier. He then said to Poirier, "Wretch, what have you done? You shall not pass." "What matters," said Poirier, "whether I pass or not? I am avenged on a woman who has made me suffer a good deal, and I have no wish to escape. Arrest me, if you like." He, however, returned upstairs, and the concierge and his wife hastened to summon the police. The police at once proceeded to the man's bedroom on the 6th story, but did not find him or any trace of the crime. They accordingly descended to the offices, the door of which was open, and found that the murder had been committed in a kitchen attached to them, which is fitted up as a bedroom. The first object that attracted their attention was an iron balance forming part of a letter copying press, and as it was covered with blood and had hair adhering to it, it was evident that the victim had been beaten about the head with it. On a table was a knife stained with blood. Near the bed, which was also stained with blood, a fact which shows that the young woman must have been struck on the head whilst lying in it, was a large tin pail, nearly filled with blood, and in this pail was the head of the victim. The head, according to all appearance, had been cut off with the knife, but as the knife was old and much injured by use, the operation must have been a long and difficult one. The fleshy parts of the neck, for example, were not cut through, but hacked. A carpet by the side of the bed was saturated with blood. On the table were some empty bottles of wine, some biscuits, and other remains of a supper. The manner in which the murderer effected his escape has already been described. The name of the murdered female has not yet been ascertained, but from her dress and appearance she is supposed to have been a femme de chambre, a maid. The crime captivated the Parisians. Focusing on the supposed love angle of the murder, there was sympathy for the murderer and his alleged broken heart. Parisians were also captivated by the ghoulish prospect of seeing the battered and beheaded young woman at the morgue. Parisians in their thousands rushed to the morgue to get a good look at the unidentified woman who had been so brutally beheaded. From the Morning Post, the 11th of August 1856, the frightful murder in Paris. The extraordinary murder in the Rue de la Fille d'Elt continues to excite profound
sensation in Paris. Yesterday, the body was still exposed at the morgue, and the head was fitted to the neck, the hair being so arranged to prevent the place where the head was severed being seen. The deceased appears to have been about 25 years of age, and was rather vigorously constituted, and of average height, but she was not so pretty as first stated. So vast a crowd assembled to view the body that it was expedient to form the persons composing into a line to be admitted 2 by 2, but none of them recognized the woman. The police are making the most active searches after the murderer Poirier, but as yet without any success. It is considered probable that he has committed suicide, and it is supposed that in jumping from the window just before the police went to arrest him, his object was not to escape, but to kill himself. The Canal Saint-Martin was searched yesterday, but no dead body was found there. It appears from an examination of the body that the murderer must have stunned her by blows on the head with the iron bar of the copying press already alluded to, that then he stabbed her with a knife and received the blood which flowed from the wound into the pail, and that then, when she was quite dead, he proceeded to cut off her head. It is supposed that his intention was to dismember the body, but that after cutting off the head, he found that the operation would take too much time, and he accordingly determined to bury her in the cellar. Having completely stripped the woman and enveloped the neck in her chemise, as first mentioned, to prevent the blood from falling about, he put the body on his shoulders with the legs in the air. He descended the staircase, and the arms fell and struck against the step, and it was the noise so occasioned which awoke the concierge. Had it not been for this noise, the man would have no doubt succeeded in burying the body, and he would have had then been easily been able to remove the head, the blood, and the other traces of his atrocious crime. The murderer, who it is stated belongs to a respectable family, is of short stature, slightly made, and of a harsh cast of countenance. He was attentive to his duties and gave satisfaction to his employers. Poirier is finally discovered hanging in the woods from a tree in an apparent suicide, as had been predicted by the police. His body is badly decomposed. He is identified primarily from the clothes and the keys to his room at the lodging house. Empty brandy bottles are nearby. From the Morning Post, the 14th of August, 1856. The late murder in the Rue de la Fidèle. Suicide of the murderer. It has at last been ascertained what has become of Poirier, the murderer of the woman Hadro, in the Rue de la Fidèle. The dead body of a man was on Monday found hanging by the neck to a tree in an unfrequented part of the Bois de Vincennes, and 2 empty bottles which had contained brandy were lying close by. The body was immediately taken to the morgue, and as there were no papers on it to show who the deceased was, the chief of the detective police, who was entrusted with the search after the murderer, was summoned. He found that the corpse was in such an advanced state of decomposition that it was impossible to make a description of it, but the height and the structure of the frame were the same as those of Poirier. The dress, too, consisting of a black frock coat, a dark pair of trousers, and a peculiar hat, the brim been lined with cloth, and a pair of slippers was precisely that which he had described to have worn on the night of the crime. Lastly, 2 keys were found on the deceased, and one of them turned out to be that of his room in the Rue de la Fidèle, the other that of the outer door of the office of the same address at which he was employed as a porter. The concierge of the house recognized the 2 keys. There is no doubt, therefore, that the body found is that of the murderer, and it is supposed that he committed suicide on Sunday the 3rd, the day following that on which the crime was perpetrated. A murderer who escaped the criminal justice system. Sadly, little else was known of this case in England. Morgue viewing. However, within the press, the case brought up the French predilection for going to the morgue to look at dead bodies as a form of entertainment. This fascination with the dead was prevalent in the Victorian era, but the French had transformed this activity into a form of entertainment. The Paris morgue became famous and a must-see when visiting. The Paris morgue was known to receive vast numbers of visitors regularly. Depending on the crime of the day, vast crowds could arrive, requiring the police to step in for crowd control. An average Parisian would scan the papers in the morning, noting any particularly gruesome deaths, and arrive at the morgue later to see the corpse on display in the window for themselves. Although the opening of the morgue was to allow family and friends to identify a missing relative or friend, the majority of the visitors to the Paris morgue were tourists. The more gruesome or mysterious the death, as recounted in the papers, the larger the number of people. When the newspapers reported a decapitated or bloody person to be on display, tens of thousands of people were known to attend. From the Crimson, men are crowding and elbowing each other, old hags are pointing towards the glass and croaking to one another. Pretty women are gazing with white faces of pity, but with none the less thirsty greediness, upon some fascinating spectacle. Little children are being held aloft in strong arms, that they too may see the dreadful thing, and they do see, and they toss their tiny wavering arms aloft and crow gleefully. Another article in describing the rush to view a new body writes, "The mob rushes through the doors with savage cries. Fallen hats are trumped on, parasols and umbrellas are broken, and yesterday women fell sick, having been half suffocated." Paris guidebooks offered opening times and advice on the best times to visit the morgue as a tourist. Market stalls and hawkers popped up around the streets of the morgue, selling sweets and oranges for the family day out. The morgue became one of the top tourist attractions of the city. By the close of the 19th century, the morgue had garnered such widespread attention that nearly every guidebook on Paris made mention of it. The social commentator Hugues Leroux penned in 1888, "There are few people having visited Paris who do not know the morgue." Exploiting the heightened interest, local vendors swiftly capitalized on the phenomena. The sidewalk outside the morgue frequently teemed with individuals hawking oranges, cookies, and coconut slices. While other morgues may have drawn tourists, none could match the allure of Paris. In 1864, to accommodate the tourists, a new purpose-built morgue was built and designed to attract the maximum number of visitors, ostensibly as a means to expedite the identification of corpses. Situated behind the Cathedral of Notre Dame, deep in the heart of the city, the new morgue not only commanded a prime location, but also remained open from dawn to dusk 7 days a week, far surpassing the accessibility of any other prominent morgue of its time. The morgue's interior boasted a rather welcoming design, with the exhibition room accommodating up to 50 visitors. Rows of lifeless forms lay on stone slabs behind glass windows. Flanking these windows stood a pair of verdant curtains, reminiscent of those found in a retail establishment, a spectacle likened to a large department store window when the merchandise has been removed on a Saturday night, as per commentators of the time. Attendants of the morgue would hang the garments of the deceased on pegs adjacent to their bodies. Initially, in the earlier years of the morgue, cold water would drip onto their bodies from a tap in the ceiling to impede decomposition. By 1882, this method was replaced by an extensive refrigeration system. The morgue's well-attended exhibitions drew frequent comparisons to theatrical performances. Renowned French novelist Émile Zola described it as an affordable show for all. On rare occasions when no bodies were on display, disgruntled crowds voiced their discontent, complaining that death allowed itself an intermission that day without thinking of their good pleasure. However, when observers labelled the morgue as a theatre, they referred not only to the sight of the lifeless figures. The visitors might also unexpectedly find themselves witnessing dramatic criminal investigations as well. Police frequently brought suspected murderers to the morgue, exposing them to their victims, believing that the shock of seeing the consequences of their actions would elicit confessions. These confrontations became common to the extent that in 1888 the Paris morgue installed electric lights, with the idea of increasing the effect produced upon murderers upon being confronted with their victims. Under the effect of the lights, the confrontations were expected to be much more effective. Remarkably, this strategy proved successful, with Paris police records documenting several instances of suspects who, after initially refusing to cooperate, confessed their crimes upon visiting the morgue. The morgue as theatre, tourist attraction, and detection, all in the centre of Paris. A French Victorian day out for the whole family.
Cases 2 and 3. The Killer Catherines. 2 Victorian crimes of jealousy, rage, and ruin. True crimes from 1850 and 1890. In this next case, we turn to 2 women separated by 40 years and by very different worlds, yet bound by the same name and the same tragic path. Our first Catherine takes us to rural Queen's County in Ireland in 1850, where a young wife trapped in an unhappy and violent marriage finds herself at the centre of a killing that shocked the district. Her mother stands accused beside her, and the courtroom's verdict would change both of their lives forever. It is a story steeped in the harsh realities faced by Victorian women with no power, no property, and no way out. Our second Catherine brings us to the cloisters of Oxford University in 1890, a world of scholars, privilege, and tightly controlled reputations. Here, a broken romance spirals into anonymous letters, obsession, and eventually a gunshot that echoes across the college quads. What began as a private heartbreak becomes one of the most sensational academic scandals of its decade. Two women, two eras, two lives derailed by desperation, jealousy, and the unforgiving social pressures of their time. These are the killer Catherines.
Catherine Moore, Queen's County, Ireland, 1850. This case, with the charge against Catherine for murder and her mother as an accessory after the fact, gripped the news in the area at the time. The story is a sad one. Catherine, who is clearly in a marriage that is damaging to her and that she states she never wanted, attempts to make her escape by leaving him and moving back to her mother. Her mother sells all their possessions, leaves and travels to America, but returns a few weeks later, penniless and demanding some support from his beleaguered wife. From the Mayo Constitution, the 26th of March, 1850. Assizes Intelligence, Queen's County. Catherine Moore, an extremely fine young woman, and Elizabeth Moore, her mother, were placed at the bar, the former charged with the wilful murder of her husband, Patrick Moore, on the 27th of August last at Truro in this county, and the mother, Elizabeth Moore, was charged as an accessory after the fact. Owen Moore, brother of the prisoner Catherine, examined, states he heard his mother and sister say that his sister Catherine had taken the ass and went towards Clongerman Bog with the body of her husband, Patrick Moore, whom she had killed. About 2 hours after that, witness saw his sister returning with the ass and car. Witness called her a murderess. She said in reply it was no harm, and said if he spoke of it, she would get his mother to beat him. He heard Catherine tell his mother and sister Biddy that she had put her husband's body in a hole by the side of a ditch near Clongerman. He states he saw blood on the ass's car, which his mother washed off. Early on the morning of Monday the 27th, witness heard his sister Catherine call his mother, who went out with her. His mother and sister afterwards told witness that they removed the body from Murray's garden to their own garden, where they covered it with rushes at the back of the summer house. Catherine's testament. The Crown produced as evidence statement from the prisoner Catherine, which was as follows. She was desired by her husband Saturday night, the 26th of August, to meet him and bring him some whiskey with her. She met him in a field adjoining her house. She brought the whiskey with her, and he drank. They had a difference about something he wanted to do, and which she prevented. When he got enraged and took a large knife out of his pocket and attempted to stab her, she resisted, and in wrestling and wrenching the knife came across his throat. She felt the warm blood as they rolled together towards a deep dike of a ditch. He shouted, and she, being afraid of her mother, put her hand on his mouth. He puffed and snorted, but she held her hand on him until he ceased to move, and she then left. At about midday on Monday, she got him into her mother's ass car, carried him, and tied his hands with a cord. She then drove to the bog road and pitched the body into a small hole. She tied his coat about his head and face and covered him over with bog. She set off to her brother in Dundalk, who gave her 7 guineas, and then went to Liverpool on her way to America. When she got a letter from her brother Pat desiring her to come home, she came back and found that her mother and sisters had been taken. She said at once that she was guilty and that God would free the innocent. She went to bed, and the sergeant of police came the morning at 7 o'clock and took her prisoner. More witnesses are brought forward to attest to the finding of his body and to corroborate Catherine's statement. Catherine Murphy was then examined. She and her son Michael were at the bog Wednesday, the 26th of September last, when her son called out that there was a dead man in the bog hole. Witness was then about 10 yards from the spot. She came over to where her son pointed and saw a man's foot with a stocking on it. His toes were through the stocking. His head was sunk in the bog hole. Better than half the man was over the water. Part of the leg and thighs were eaten as if by dogs. She then went and alarmed the neighbourhood and sent her son for the police. Elizabeth Moore, sister of Catherine, examined. Her mother told her that Catherine had awoke her out of bed at daylight and told her that Catherine had killed her husband. Their mother then brought her out and showed her his body lying at the back of the summer house in the garden. He was without a hat, and his head and neck were lying against the ditch. His clothes were on, and he was covered with rushes. The clothes could be seen through. She saw his throat had been cut, and the blood was about his neck, bosom, and waistcoat. Her mother told her it was in his own garden, and about 2-3 perches from the summer house he was killed in, and that she helped Catherine bring the body from that place to the summer house. After that, Catherine came in. She asked her sister, Catherine, what made her do it. Catherine said it was neck or nothing with her, that he pulled out a knife and thought to kill her. He thought to stab her in the neck, and she turned and cut him in the neck. Witness then said he would go for the police and get her taken, and that she would get her hung. Her mother said they would all be taken if witness did so they would say they all helped her. This closed the evidence. The Lord Chief Justice, having delivered a clear and able charge, the jury retired, and in about 1 hour returned in court with a verdict of guilty against both prisoners. His lordship proceeded to place the black cap on his head and pronounce sentence of death on the prisoner Catherine, and of transportation for life on the mother as an accessory. The scene at this moment was truly distressing. The prisoner Catherine swooned off, having been placed at the bar to hear her sentence. Catherine, with her guilty verdict, is most concerned what will become of her mother in her transportation to life. Although accepting her fate, in prison she gives the matrons more details as to the actual events. It places Catherine in a situation that was all too common for many like her at the time. From the Morning Herald, the 15th of April, 1850, the execution of Catherine Moore. Although no public confession was made on the scaffold or attested declaration in the cell, we have learned that the unhappy woman's version of the tragedy was not without some mitigating circumstances, which, if they had been advanced at her trial and sustained by evidence, might have saved her from a felon's death. Her verbal statement of the untoward event and its antecedents, even during the current month, was thus. She was married to the late Patrick Moore, much against her inclination, and that the marriage was an unhappy one. In consequence of ill treatment which she experienced from her husband's friends, in addition to matters of a more private nature, she was compelled to return to her mother's residence for shelter. Her husband, having sold off his crop and everything else he could dispose of, left the place, and it was rumoured that he went to America. After an absence of about 6 or 7 weeks, he returned penniless. He had not then a house to live in, and he had to reside with some of his friends. On the Friday morning previous to the fatal occurrence, a girl named Mary Brennan brought a message from him, which was to the effect that he wanted some money to procure whiskey and to get his shoes mended. He also added that he wanted to see her. In order to meet his demands, she pawned her clothes. On the following Saturday, her mother sent for a cloak to a neighbour's house. At this place, she met Julia King, who told her that her husband was anxious to see her. She desired her to tell him that he could meet her at the end of her mother's garden on the evening of the following Sunday. Having got money from her mother to buy bread, she kept 6pence out of it, for which she had bought a half-pint of whiskey for her husband, as he had sent her word that he was sick and wanted to cure him, he having been up 2 nights to wait. She then sent word to him to meet her. When they met, he drank the whiskey up in one draught, then commenced upbraiding her with keeping company and being intimate with other men. Some strong and angry words were interchanged. He then got into a furious passion and caught her in his arms. She asked him what he was going to do. His reply was that either of them should go to the devil, that they could not be tormenting one another any longer. He then dragged her towards a ditch and flung her into a heap of briars. He next pulled out a pocket knife, which he was in the habit of carrying, and attempted to stab her. She seized a hold of his hand, and in doing so, the knife cut her. A struggle ensued. In resisting the plunges of the knife, she turned it towards his throat, where a gash was inflicted. They still struggled, and when she eventually succeeded in wringing the knife from him, and in the excitement of the moment, she thrust it into his breast or neck. She then flung away the fatal weapon, and her husband at the same time fell into the ditch. He began to roar out, and the dogs commenced to bark. She then got afraid of an alarm being made, and she kept her hand upon his mouth to stifle his voice. After some time, she left him and went in to her mother, who, observing her torn by the thorns and cut, questioned her as to what had happened. She told her a portion of what had occurred. Early the next morning, she went out to the end of the garden, scene of the previous night's occurrence, where she found her husband dead. Catherine's execution. Thursday, the 11th instant, being the day appointed for the execution of Catherine Moore for the murder of her husband, nearly 1,000 persons assembled at the front of the jail at Maryborough. The Leinster Express, after detailing the usual preliminaries on such occasions, goes on to say the culprit had been an exceedingly pretty woman, and never in her life did she appear so interesting as when she moved along, robed in the sable vestments of death. Her eye was intensely bright. Her regular and still beautiful features were flushed. Her step elastic. Her tone of voice clear, distinct, and confident. On ascending the narrow stairs which led to the drop, she betrayed the first symptoms of weakness. Only one could ascend at a time, and her progress was impeded by her flowing garments. While her drapery was being arranged, she burst into tears, asked the Reverend Mr. Murray if he could not try and do something for her poor, afflicted mother. Having reached the landing place, she was conducted to the open press room, where, after some moments spent in prayer, she passively submitted to the operation of pinioning. During this process, she became faintish and desired the executioner not to take her short. She soon rallied and, supported by the two clergymen, mounted to the drop, still audibly beseeching God for mercy and forgiveness. And while on the drop, she again mentioned the name of her mother in a voice of yearning solicitude. After hanging the prescribed period, the body was removed and placed in a shell for burial within the precincts of the prison. It was expected that there would be a dying declaration, but there was no public confession of guilt or declaration of innocence. We have been informed that her conversation and demeanour from a short period after her sentence until the hour of execution was most satisfactory and edifying. Postscript. Catherine's mother does not survive her internment, waiting for transportation, and dies shortly after her daughter is executed. From the Dublin Evening Mail, 20th of May, 1850. Bridget Thompson, mother of Catherine Moore, who was executed last month for the murder of her husband, died of fever on Saturday in the jail at Maryborough. She had been sentenced to transportation for life as an accessory after the fact. Case 2. Catherine Reardon, Oxford, 1890. Catherine Reardon, also known as Kate, had been having a relationship with the junior dean of the college, Thomas Haynes. The relationship of some 2 years was ended by Haynes, and he then became engaged with Miss Bright, the daughter of a fellow colleague at Oxford University. Haynes reportedly had given a gift to Catherine of some £50 at the time of their breakup, worth approximately £8,000 in 2024. Here the story diverges. Catherine states that there was an understanding between them and that Haynes and her were to marry. Haynes stated that he had been most clear with Catherine that the relationship was over. Catherine, at age 33, would most likely have found it difficult to hope for any other viable marriage prospects. The engagement between Haynes and the young Miss Bright is announced, and Catherine goes into a fury. It starts with poisoned pen letters that are sent to Haynes and various colleagues. It moves onto letters to Dr. Bright threatening to kill the whole of his family. In a letter to Haynes, she threatens suicide. Catherine purchases a revolver, and it would seem that she spent some time stalking various members of the college until she had her chance that fateful day in November when, unable to see Mr. Haynes, she shoots instead Dr. Bright, father of the engaged Miss Bright. From the Sheffield Evening Telegraph, the 8th of November, 1890. The outrage at Oxford. The woman, Kate Reardon, aged 35, arrived at Oxford railway station in charge of Superintendent Head and Inspector Dixon. Shortly after 11 o'clock last night, she was at once placed in a cab and driven to the police station. The porter at the lodge of University College came forward and identified the prisoner, who, after being formally charged with shooting Dr. Bright, was lodged in the cell. The citizens are still exercised about the escape of the doctor's assailant and the ease with which she got away, but it has transpired that Mr. Weller, finding that his master had been shot by a woman, ran out and made his way to the railway station fast as he could. He failed to find the woman. The police did not receive information of the occurrence until a long time after the woman had left Oxford, but as soon as they heard of it, they telegraphed her description in all directions, and detectives were at both Reading and Paddington stations to meet the woman, but they did not find her. Kate Reardon, on being arrested at Brompton, denied the charge, said that although she had been in Oxford, she was not there on Thursday. The following is the entry on the police charge sheet. Catherine Teresa Reardon, 3A, Sydney Street, Fulham Road, no occupation, charged with attempting to wilfully murder James Bright at his residence at University College by shooting him with a revolver between 5 and 6 p.m. on Thursday. The accused was accommodated with a bed in Inspector Dixon's office, and the wife of one of the police officials attended requirements. She complained today of a bad headache, but otherwise said little. At the Oxford Police Court this morning, before the Mayor, Catherine Teresa Reardon was charged with attempting to murder Dr. Bright at the University College in Oxford on Thursday. In reply to the charge, the prisoner said, "I'm perfectly innocent." She was attired in a grey dress, dark hat with violet flowers, and wore a fur boa. She was very pale. William Tomlin, porter at the lodge, deposed that on Thursday he was having his tea when a person whom he took to be the prisoner came in and asked for Mr. Haynes, the junior dean. He showed her the way to the rooms. She went up, but came back and stood by the lodge. She saw Mr. Haynes afterwards. The latter said he wished her to leave the college. She said she would not leave the place and that she would stay there all night. Witness then went into the room where the prisoner was sitting and said that if she did not leave, he would be obliged to turn her out. He followed her down the stairs, and she said that if there was no one to take her in charge, she would leave. Witness again saw the person who he was quite certain was the prisoner, and she said to him, "You are on the alert." Subsequently, he heard of the affair at the Master. Mr. Weller, the butler to Dr. Bright, deposed that at about 4:15 on Thursday, the accused called and asked to see Miss Wickham or Miss Bright, but the request was denied her, and Dr. Bright then coming downstairs, he left by the front door. He returned later, and Dr. Bright said, "What is it?" Dr. Bright went downstairs, and the witness afterwards heard a report of a revolver, and the master said, "Go for that woman." Witness ran through the streets, but did not find her. Mr. Haynes, the junior dean, deposed that he was passing the master's house and heard voices from the library. The master said, "You must go and get a policeman," he said he would. He saw no more until he was told of the attempted murder. He was quite positive the prisoner was the woman. This was all the evidence taken, and prisoner, in reply to the question of the mayor again, said that she was perfectly innocent. The mayor then said she would be remanded until Tuesday. The accused was taken back to Inspector Dixon's office, whence she will be conveyed to the county jail. The case is an embarrassment to the university and to the Haynes family. No one clearly understands why Catherine had shot Dr. Bright. Catherine herself is quiet and stated to be unwell. As more evidence is gathered, it begins to become clear to others that the impetus of her actions was her perception of having been mistreated, as she states that she and Haynes had an agreement to wed. From the St. James's Gazette, the 10th of November, 1890. The Oxford shooting case. The prisoner before the Vice-Chancellor. Catherine Reardon was this morning brought before Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University and charged with attempting to murder Dr. Bright of University College. The prisoner looked very ill and had been in the prison infirmary since Sunday. Great excitement prevailed in the court, which was crowded with persons interested in the case, including many dons. Mr. T. Mallam prosecuted and Mr. H. Fuller defended the prisoner. Mr. John Thomas Augustus Haynes, a fellow and tutor of University College, said that on Thursday afternoon he saw the prisoner at Dr. Bright's residence. Dr. Bright said, "Here is the woman." He said, "Why are you holding a dagger over me? You promised me marriage, and I have a marriage certificate." In cross-examination, the witness, Mr. Haynes, said it was quite untrue that he had promised marriage or was married to the prisoner. He identified the letters produced as being in the prisoner's handwriting. One letter informed him that he was quite safe, but that she would murder every member of Dr. Bright's family. The prisoner sent him a written statement in which she said that she had purchased a revolver in Pall Mall 3 months ago, giving the name of Wickham. Also, that she came to Oxford on Thursday to acknowledge the wrongs she had done him, but on Dr. Bright's sending for a policeman, he fired to frighten. The case is proceeding, and Dr. Bright passed a good night and is going on well. As police continue to investigate the poison pen mystery that had been taking place for some time to various members of the staff at Oxford also becomes clear. From the Daily Telegraph and Courier in London, 10th of November 1890, the Oxford outrage, romantic details, examination of the accused. The excitement in Oxford still continues to spread with regard to the singular attack on Dr. Bright at University College. Various rumours are afloat as to the supposed motives of the crime. Slowly, however, the facts are shaping themselves into a more or less consistent story, and although there are certain points which are mysterious or, at all events, ambiguous in their import, the main outlines are tolerably clear. It appears that for some time past, anonymous letters have been received by various persons at the University City, according to one report, even by the Dean of Christ Church himself. These letters, one of which was sent to the barmaid of the Mitre, invariably contained some dark hints of what the writer described, according to her own mode of spelling, as the Oxford scandal. A scandal which concerned some particular person or persons in authority in one of the colleges, on which the anonymous sender had determined to have sifted and, if need be, avenged. The missives were literate and had various signatures, but the purport was invariably the same, and in one of them the address of the writer was incautiously divulged. It needs scarcely to be added that the person or persons with whom some kind of acquaintance was claimed by the sender of the letters was specified by name. It has already been mentioned that the address of the anonymous letter writer was known to the police, which accounts for the fact that they were at once able to telegraph to London to have the house 35 Sydney Street, Fulham Road, watched during the night. The lady, however, who is suspected of the attack, is supposed to have caught the 5:40 p.m. train from Oxford, and she certainly reached her house without molestation. On Friday morning, Superintendent Head, with Inspector Dixon, Dr. Bright's butler, left by the 12 o'clock train for Paddington, and drove at once to the house in Sydney Street, which had been also already mentioned. Both the landlady and the maid declared that their lodger, Miss Catherine Teresa Riordan, who, however, sometimes called herself Catherine O'Hara, had not left the house for some days, and that she was ill in bed. When confronted by the police and Dr. Bright's butler, the lady in question at first denied all knowledge of Oxford. Subsequently, however, she mentioned the names of Mr. Haynes and Miss Bright, and being properly identified by the butler as the visitor at Dr. Bright's house, was arrested and brought down to Oxford on Friday evening. On Saturday morning, she was brought before the mayor, Mr. Alderman, and having been formally identified by the porter at University College, the butler of Dr. Bright, and Mr. Haynes himself, was remanded for trial on the charge of shooting at Dr. Bright with an attempt to murder. For some time past, has already been stated, letters had been received at Oxford mentioning Mr. Haynes and Miss Bright by name and threatening vengeance. The story which they contained, which may be taken for whatever it is worth, is that Mr. Haynes had promised marriage elsewhere, and in one letter that he was already a married man. These statements Mr. Haynes has emphatically contradicted, as mentioned in our Saturday's issue. The prisoner, Miss Riordan, is a woman of about 30 or 35 years, ladylike in her appearance and well built. When she appeared before the mayor on Saturday, she looked deadly pale, with a strange light in her eyes, which certainly betokened great nervous excitement, although in manner she was composed. She declares herself to be innocent of the crime with which she is charged. If we assume that the sender of the letters and Miss Riordan are one of the same person, the natural inference is that she was too weighted by a violent jealousy, that she had come down to Oxford determined to do something desperate, and that, as she could see neither Miss Bright nor Mr. Haynes alone, she turned her vengeance against the father of the engaged lady. If the other supposition be correct, and the assailant of Dr. Bright was either temporarily or normally off her mental balance, it is of course useless to look for any motive for the act of a madman. Meanwhile, it is satisfactory to know that the master of University College is on the high road to recovery. He has had a very narrow escape, but as matters stand, he is pretty well out of danger. It is said that there had been no instances, at all events within recent years, of a charge so grave in character as that affecting Miss Riordan being brought before the Vice-Chancellor, and as a rule the cases are more or less trivial, dealing either with rowdyism on the part of undergraduates in the streets, or with disputes between the students and shopkeepers on the subject of debt. As for Miss Riordan, she was at once conveyed in a cab to the police station in the High Street. As the hour was so late, the crowds of persons who had been waiting about in expectation of seeing her had almost dispersed. Only about a score of men and boys followed the cab. The prisoner was not put into a cell, what was provided with a bed in the quarters of a married constable. She is a good-looking person, and gave but little indication of being the insane young woman that she has been described to be. First, freely and rationally, when asked of the incident connecting with her to arrest, and although she has asserted that she was not out of London on Thursday, she was positively identified by Mr. Haynes, sub-dean of University College, by Dr. Bright's butler, and by the college porter. Witness after witness is called, confirming her presence on the campus and of her having been the person who clearly shot at Dr. Bright. Her defense states that she is suffering from mental instability, but no medical evidence is produced confirming this diagnosis. Dr. Bright is confirmed as improving, but he is unable medically to testify. Catherine, with the waves of witnesses who have seen her shoot Dr. Bright, throws herself on the mercy of the court during the inquest. From the Manchester Courier, the 11th of November 1890, the Oxford shooting case, committal of the accused, confession. Mr. Mallam here handed a document to Mr. Haynes, the body of which witness said was not the prisoner's handwriting, but certain of the words were. Mr. Mallam read the document, the substance of which was, to Mr. Haynes, I am guilty of writing letters to Dr. Bright and Mr. Haynes, for which I am very sorry. I did it at a time when I was not responsible for my action. I bought a revolver in Pall Mall 2 months ago. I came to Oxford and I fired a shot at Dr. Bright. I wished to see Mr. Haynes to tell him how sorry I was for the wrong I had done him. I fired not for the purpose of harming Dr. Bright, but only to frighten him. I had no motive, and I am very sorry if I have harmed Mr. Haynes or Dr. Bright. I have been very ill for 2 months. I can only throw myself upon the mercy of the court. I am very sorry for what I have done. I do not wish to be defended, but leave myself to their mercy. Catherine Reardon. The signature, said witness, was in the handwriting of the prisoner. From the confession that Catherine has made, some of the poisoned pen letters that had been received are also read out in court. Mr. Mallam then read the letter received by witness. It contained the following passages. If Dr. Bright thinks he can get his daughter married without a scandal, he has made a grand mistake. Haynes is a married man, though Bright may not believe it. There occurred a passage setting forth a horrible charge against Dr. Bright. Another letter states, Dr. Bright and his family don't ride out now because they are afraid of a shot. Don't be surprised if you see 7 coffins turned out of University College in a few days. The people of Oxford will have another Hampstead murder, only there will be 2. The letter also referred to another person mentioned in the course of the case. The written confession, attested by Emma Jordan, matron of Her Majesty's Prison in Oxford, was put in and sworn to. The charge was then formally read over to the prisoner by the Vice-Chancellor. Mr. Fuller, on behalf of the prisoner, replied, I say nothing, I reserve my defence. The depositions of the several witnesses were then read over, and the several letters and documents marked for reference. The enclosure to the barmaid of the Mitre, it transpired, was certain verses of doggerel of filthy description. The Vice-Chancellor then committed prisoner for trial at the ensuing assizes opening on Friday on a charge of the attempted murder of Dr. James Frank Bright by shooting him with a revolver. Police continue to investigate in anticipation of the court case to come. Some of the mysteries, such as what had happened to Catherine's wet clothes and why were police informed that she had been in her room 3 days during the shooting, now explained. From the Portsmouth Evening News, the 13th of November 1890. The Oxford shooting case. Information has reached Oxford that Inspector and Sergeant Church of the Metropolitan Police had made a further search of Catherine Reardon's rooms, with the result that 1 or 2 points about which there was some mystery have now been cleared up. It will be remembered that on Thursday night, when the attempted murder took place, the streets were very muddy, and the Oxford police when they arrested the woman, naturally expected to find her clothing would show some signs of her journey through the streets. This, however, they failed to do. The London police, however, in making their further search, found a black dress and jacket hanging behind the bedroom door, which were not there when Superintendent Head arrested the prisoner. The landlady, Mrs. Oakfield, on being questioned as to where they were at the time, said she found them in the passage on Thursday night dirty and had them brushed. Elizabeth Wright, the servant, now states that Miss Reardon asked her on Friday morning to say if anyone called for her, that she'd been in bed for 3 days and that she took her tea to her room at 4:30 on Thursday. She is charged with attempted murder, but although there is no medical evidence of diminished responsibility, the judge and the jury seem to be sympathetic, and Catherine is convicted of wounding with intent, a lesser crime than the original charge of attempted murder. From the Bridlington and Quay Gazette, the 22nd of November 1890, Oxford shooting case, trial and sentence. At the Oxford Assizes on Monday, Catherine Teresa Reardon, 35, of Sydney Street, Fulham Road, London, was charged with the attempted murder of Dr. Frank Bright on the 16th inst. The prisoner, who looked in better health than at the preliminary, pleaded not guilty in a firm voice. The jury found prisoner guilty of wounding with intent to do grievous bodily harm. Justice Matthew sentenced her 6 years penal servitude. The sentence was received with hisses in court, a demonstration which the judge severely commented on. A request is made for mitigation of her sentence based on Catherine not being accountable for her actions at the time of the offence, but the request is denied by the Home Secretary. Catherine is sent to the Knapp Hill Female Convict Prison in Woking, where she completes her 6 years. Dr. Bright recovered and passed in 1920. He was 88 years of age.
Cases 4 and 5, Love, Lies and Murder, two shocking Victorian Edwardian crimes of fatal betrayal. We now turn to two love stories that ended not at the altar, but in violence, each driven by heartbreak, fear, and the terrible pressure placed on young couples in the late Victorian and Edwardian eras. Our first case takes us to Preston in 1887. A young couple, Alfred Sowery and Annie Kelly, are on the eve of emigrating to America for a new life together. But a single disagreement over marriage and the expectations of respectability leads to a shocking murder inside a quiet hotel dining room. What happened in those 5 minutes would horrify the entire town. Our second case moves us forward to Eastbourne in 1901, where two teenage lovers are found shot in their lodging house room, one dead, one barely alive. Was it a pact, a quarrel, or something far more complicated? Conflicting medical testimony, a scribbled note, and the girl's refusal to explain left the courts and the country divided. Two young couples, two desperate moments behind closed doors, and two tragedies shaped by expectations, deception, and the darkest corners of the human heart. These are the stories of love turned deadly, and the fateful betrayals that shocked Victorian and Edwardian Britain. The Preston Murder, 1887. In our first case, it is 1887, and Alfred Sowery and Annie Kelly have checked into a hotel for the evening before their voyage to America, where they plan to settle. Sowery
has ordered a meal, although they are a bit late to order. They are seated in one of the dining rooms as the waitress goes out to get the linen to dress the table for them. Then everything goes terribly, terribly wrong. From the Lancashire Evening Post, the 18th of May, 1887, a Temperance Hotel attempted suicide. This afternoon, a horrible murder, deliberately planned and coolly executed, was perpetrated in the Clarendon Hotel, Fishergate Hill, kept by Mr. H. Whitlock. The facts, in short, are these. At about 2:45 this afternoon, a young man named Alfred Sowery, whose brother is a pawnbroker in Preston, entered the Clarendon Hotel in company with a young woman named Annie Kelly, aged 19, to whom he was engaged to be married. She had been engaged as a laundress at the Bull Hotel up to Monday. The couple were to have been married this morning, and it was generally understood to have been their intention to proceed to America tomorrow. On entering the hotel, they met Miss Whitlock and asked, "Can we have some dinner?" The reply was that they were too late for joints, but they were told they could have chops and potatoes, to which Sowery made answer, "That will do." Miss Whitlock then showed the couple to the coffee room, and the young woman took her seat in an easy chair to the left of the fireplace, and both were respectively attired. They had not been in the house more than 5 minutes when the report of a revolver was heard. Miss Whitlock went to the front door, thinking something had occurred in the street, but, seeing nothing, she entered the coffee room. She intended laying down the cloth, and when turning towards the occupants of the room, she observed the young woman leaning back on the chair with a bullet wound in the right temple, from which blood was freely flowing. The man was standing at his victim's right side. It is evident he must have held the revolver close to the woman's face, which was blackened with powder and considerably swollen. The eye was also protruding. She was quite dead. Miss Whitlock staggered out of the room and proceeded towards the kitchen to Mrs. Whitlock, who, on learning of what had occurred, went to the room, and here she saw Sowery standing with the revolver to his right temple and evidently trying to pull the trigger. He was very pale and looked fixedly at Mrs. Whitlock, who exclaimed, "Oh, for God's sake, don't do it!" He never spoke. Mrs. Whitlock ran to call Mr. Hoctor, who resided in the hotel and who was resting after dinner in an adjoining room. Mr. Hoctor immediately leapt up and entered the coffee room, where he found Sowery holding a 5-chambered revolver at arm's length, with his right arm outstretched. Mr. Hoctor approached him, but didn't speak. Mr. Hoctor, horrified at the scene, at once ran out of the house to find a constable. He fetched Inspector Durham from the offices of the headquarters of the county constabulary and hurried back with him to the hotel. The man was then seated and appeared cool and self-determined. Durham at once took hold of him. Other officers of the county police and officers of the borough force ran down to the room. Sowery, having been secured, was taken to the police station. A medical gentleman who was at present officiating for the doctor was sent for, and he arrived at 10 minutes to 3. He found a bullet wound in the right temple and considerable swelling and discoloration of the flesh. Life was then slowly ebbing away, and the unfortunate young woman expired in a few minutes, being of course beyond medical help. A telephonic message was at once sent to Messrs. Harding's stables for the ambulance, and this arrived shortly after 3 o'clock, and the body was moved to the mortuary in Tithebarn Street. A large crowd had meanwhile assembled in the neighbourhood of the hotel on the news becoming known, and there was a sensation of horror throughout the immediate neighbourhood. There can be no doubt that Sowery had deliberately planned the murder, and that he went to this private family hotel for the direct purpose of carrying out his awful determination. There is no question that Sowery had murdered his sweetheart with the intention of killing himself afterwards, but it is a mystery as to why. Sowery is immediately arrested. From the Lancashire Evening Post, the 18th of May, 1887, the arrest of the prisoner. Important statement of Inspector Durham. Police Inspector Durham of the County Constabulary Headquarters, interviewed by a reporter, said, "I am an inspector of the County Constabulary headquartered in Preston. I was in our office at the county offices in Fishergate till this afternoon, when a man came in and said that a murder had been committed in the Clarendon Hotel, which is situated at the corner of Jordan Street. I ran down to the hotel, and the coffee room, which is situated on the left-hand side of the entrance, just beyond the porch, was pointed out as the chamber in which the tragedy had been committed. I instantly opened the door of the room, and I noticed that the place was tolerably well filled with smoke. Sitting on a chair in the right-hand corner of the room, I saw a young fellow whose name afterwards proved to be Alfred Sowery, and about half a yard to his left, reclining in an easy chair, was a young, well-dressed woman with an awful wound near the right eye, from which blood was flowing freely. The woman appeared to be expiring, and her head was inclined over the left shoulder. Sowery held in his right hand a 6-chambered revolver, apparently of a common and cheap type. I told him to put the revolver down at once, and after a slight hesitation he laid it down on a little table in front of the window on his right-hand side. I picked up the revolver, arrested the man, and took him to the county police station, and a few minutes afterwards handed him over to P.C. Cartmel of the Borough Police. The girl, Kelly, died shortly afterwards. She and the murderer, it is said, had been keeping company for several months, and had actually arranged to get married yesterday and leave today for America. Sowery, when arrested, had in his pockets £50, with which he purposed defraying the expenses of his journey. An inquest is held to try to gather all the surrounding facts of the case and to ascertain the responsibility of the prisoner, Sowery. He is easily found guilty of the murder of his sweetheart, Annie Kelly. Sowery is deemed to be sane and is taken to trial, where the evidence is clear that he had planned the execution. Despite the obvious evidence, Sowery pleads not guilty. From the Lancashire Evening Post, the 1st of August 1887, the Preston murder, the crime. Alfred Sowery, who was 25 years of age, was connected with a respectable Preston family for whom the utmost sympathy has been expressed by all classes. His father and mother are both of advanced age, the former having for many years held an honourable position in Her Majesty's service, and his elder brother is a highly esteemed tradesman. For some time the culprit had assisted his brothers in the business, but latterly seemed to have fallen into loose habits, and it was understood that he contemplated going to America to make a fresh start. About March last, Sowery formed the acquaintance of Annie Kelly, a girl of 19 years of age, who had left her parents in Ireland to seek employment in this country. For close on a year, she had been employed as a laundry maid at the Bull Hotel in Preston, where she gained golden accolades for her steadiness and her conduct. An acquaintance thus formed between Sowery and this young woman, which ripened into mutual attachment, and their most intimate associates understood that they would shortly be married. Annie Kelly left the Bull Hotel on Sunday afternoon, May the 15th, and did not return until the following morning. Where she had been in the interim never transpired publicly, but while no shadow of suspicion was ever cast on her character, there seems little doubt that she spent the day with her lover. Being expostulated with by the manageress of the hotel, the girl intimated that she wished to give up her situation as she was about to be leaving England. On Monday night, May 16th, Agnes Newell, a kitchen maid at the Bull, saw Sowery and Kelly together at Fishergate. Both had apparently been crying, and they were evidently in distress about something. Miss Newell asked Kelly if they were to be married, and the latter, smiling, gave an affirmative reply. Sowery, however, contradicted this statement, but, in answer to another question, said his intentions toward the young woman were good. He gave Miss Newell to understand that they were on the eve of departing for America, and being asked whether he intended to marry Annie before starting, he replied in the negative, adding that time would not permit. Here, possibly, is an explanation of the melancholy events that followed. Annie Kelly was a girl of unblemished reputation, tenacious of her honour and deeply attached to Sowery as she apparently was. She still objected to starting with him for America otherwise than as a married woman. That night, however, Kelly removed her box from the Hull Hotel to the house of Mrs. Gardner, Christchurch Place, where Sowery accompanied her. The girl stayed all night at the house, and Sowery, who had previously informed Mrs. Gardner that Annie was going to America on the following day, and that he was going part of the way with her, went elsewhere. Kelly left the house on the Tuesday afternoon, and we have no further traces of her movements till the following day. Meantime, on the Tuesday, Sowery purchased a revolver and cartridges at the shop of Mr. Baines, pawnbroker on Church Street. This brings us down to that fateful Wednesday, the 18th of May. Shortly before 3 o'clock on the afternoon of that day, the young couple visited the Clarendon Temperance Hotel in Fishergate Hill, kept by Mr. Whitlock. Whether the young fellow had deliberately taken that poor friendless girl to this secluded spot for the purpose of murdering her, or whether he was urged on by an uncontrollable impulse to commit this dastardly crime, or whether his subsequent act was the passionate outcome of some lover's quarrel, will probably never be known. However, the pair were shown into the coffee room and were left together while Mrs. Whitlock went to prepare the dinner which Sowery had ordered. About 5 minutes after Miss Isabel Whitlock, who had in the meantime heard a noise which she imagined was caused by a stone being thrown at the front door, went into the room to lay the tablecloth. Then she realized the true cause of the sound that she had heard, for a terrible picture confronted her. Sowery was standing on one side holding a revolver straight before him, and in a chair close by lay poor Annie Kelly, whose lifeblood was fast flowing from a wound in her right temple. Other inmates of the house were immediately summoned, and on Mrs. Whitlock entering the room she saw Sowry holding the muzzle of the revolver to his own head and vainly trying to pull the trigger. He first placed the weapon to his temple, then his cheek, and was evidently making the most desperate attempts to fire. In terrible alarm, Mrs. Whitlock called out to him, "For God's sake, don't do it!" and the young fellow, for the moment, desisted in his effort. A doctor was called to the poor girl, but she was beyond human skill. The bullet had accomplished its deadly purpose, and 5 minutes later she breathed her last. Sowry was taken into custody by Inspector Derham of the County Constabulary, now Chief Constable of Blackpool, to whom he practically confessed his guilt. "Who has done this?" said the officer, pointing to the wound on the temple of the dying girl. "I did," replied Sowry, "and this," he added, indicating the weapon, "is the revolver I have done it with. I would have shot myself, but the revolver misfired, and I am sorry that I did not do it myself." Subsequently, Sowry was handed over to the Preston Borough Police, and on his being searched, over £50 and 7 loaded cartridges were found upon him. There was also in his jacket a letter purporting to have been written by Annie Kelly, addressed to her sisters in America, intimating that she intended to sail for New York by a White Star steamer on May the 17th, the day prior to the murder. Possibly this, if it could have been fully investigated, might have furnished some clue as to the motive for the terrible crime. The revolver, a 5-chambered British bulldog, was found to be loaded in 4 chambers, the remaining one having been discharged. Sowry, in his attempts at self-destruction, had evidently tried all the chambers, but they had successively misfired through badly struck with the pin of the hammer. The murderer was, in due course, committed to Lancaster Assizes by both the magistrates and the coroner. The trial took place on July the 15th before Mr. Justice Day. At that time the prisoner was in a woeful plight, and really seemed as though there were good grounds for counsel's question to his lordship as to whether the man was in fit condition to plead. The matter was, however, settled by the accused having already in a faint voice but still firmly pleaded not guilty. The trial proceeded, and a terrible ordeal it was for everyone who heard it, but particularly for those more immediately concerned. The prisoner seemed utterly prostrated, and his nervous agitation was such that he could hardly have comprehended the true nature of the proceedings. However, the prosecution was conducted with the utmost fairness, and the prisoner was ably defended by Mr. McKeon, who set up the theory that the girl might have been shot accidentally while Sowry was examining the revolver. A few words which fell from the judge in summing up were sufficient to dispel that view, even it could ever have been seriously entertained, and the jury had no other course open to them but to find the prisoner guilty of the capital charge. His lordship, in passing the death sentence, told the prisoner that there could be no mercy for him in this world, but urged him to seek mercy where alone it could be found. During the brief period which elapsed between the passing of the sentence and its execution, the unhappy young man seems to have followed the kindly advice of Mr. Justice Day, making good use of the opportunities afforded to him to prepare himself for the great change through which he had to pass and the greater judgment he had to meet. He recovered a day or two from the attack of nervous prostration which affected him at the trial, and received with apparent attention and comfort the chaplain's ministration. Sowery on execution day was prostrate and had to be forcibly pushed by 3 warders and held in place upon the drop. From the Illustrated Police News, the 6th of August 1887, the execution at Lancaster of Alfred Sowery. Entering the castle at an early hour on Monday morning, the executioner went into the condemned cell at about 7:45. The culprit violently resisted the pinioning. The procession, consisting of the chaplain, warders, and culprit, entered the chapel yard. As soon as the culprit saw the scaffold, he began moaning and uttering exclamations of horror, and had to be pushed along by 3 warders. He was gotten to the scaffold with difficulty, 2 warders having to hold him until the drop fell. When the rope was put around Sowery's neck, he gave forth a loud exclamation. The drop fell about a minute before 8 o'clock, death being instantaneous. The culprit, who was a slightly built man, was allowed a drop of 5'6". He made no confession, but left a message for the parents of the murdered girl. The Eastbourne Tragedy, 1901. 19-year-old Lawrence Charlie Osborne lies dead at the feet of his lover Alice Furnell, who has also been shot. But who shot whom, and why? From the Echo, London, the 13th of December 1901. Eastbourne Love Tragedy. A succession of shots in the ground floor startled the inmates of a house in Ceylon Place, Eastbourne, last evening. A policeman was called, and as the door of the room was found locked, the officer entered through the window. In the locked room he found a man lying on the floor quite dead, with 2 bullet wounds in his left breast. A woman was in a chair suffering from 1 or more serious bullet wounds. The woman was removed to the hospital, and there are hopes of her recovery. She articulated the one word, Violet. It is surmised that the man first shot the woman and then committed suicide. The couple, who are believed to have been lovers, have been identified. The man, it is said, is Charles Osborne, a painter of Shepherd's Bush, and the woman Alice Furnell, a daughter of a tobacconist at Hailsham in Sussex. The young woman is now believed to be out of danger, the bullet which entered her body having been extracted. Charlie, as he was known, is dead, with 2 bullet wounds in his breast. Alice, who was severely wounded, is rushed to Princess Alice Hospital, where she remains for quite some time recovering. The police are attempting to understand who shot whom, or whether this was a lover's suicide pact. The father of Charlie states that his son, the deceased, was a teetotaler and made good wages. The initial inquest takes place to gather the evidence. From the Portsmouth Evening News, the 16th of December 1901, the Eastbourne Tragedy, strange story at the inquest. The inquest on Charles Osborne, a painter aged 19 of Askew Terrace, Shepherd's Bush, who was found dead with 2 bullet wounds in his chest in a house at Ceylon Place, Eastbourne, on Thursday, was opened on Saturday, and evidence of a remarkable character was given. It was stated that Osborne and a girl named Alice Furnell of Hailsham, who was also discovered in the same room in an unconscious condition with a bullet wound in her left breast, met in London some months ago and became engaged, Osborne telling her he had come into a fortune of £2,000. They left Hailsham and proceeded to Eastbourne on Wednesday night, taking lodgings as man and wife at the home in which the tragedy was enacted. They appeared to be in the best of spirits till as late as 5 on the following evening, when last seen by the landlady. Half an hour later, 3 shots fired in succession were heard, and when the room in which they were was entered by the police, the girl was found sitting on a chair, moaning and clutching a wound in her breast, while her lover was sitting at her feet, dead, with a revolver lying within an inch of his right hand. The police discarded the theory raised by the jury that the girl fired the shots. She was taken to the hospital and her condition has recently become very grave. The father of the girl, a tobacconist living in Hailsham, in reply to questions, said that his daughter had been in the habit of leaving home for days at a time, her whereabouts being unknown, and that she had threatened on several occasions, when in want of money, to commit suicide. Only last week, oxalic acid and revolver cartridges were found in her possession. The case was adjourned till January the 15th. More evidence is revealed from the hospital matron, as a note scribbled on an envelope and a letter addressed to a friend are uncovered from the clothes of Alice. From the Western Mail, the 16th of January 1902, the Eastbourne tragedy, strange revelations at the inquest. The inquest on Lawrence Osborne, who died from bullet wounds at the Eastbourne lodging house some weeks ago while staying with a young woman named Alice Fennell, who was also shot, although not fatally, was resumed on Wednesday. The female was still unable to attend. Miss Ramsay, the matron at the hospital, spoke to finding 2 letters on the woman. On the envelope, on one were the words, "I shot myself and Charlie," signed Alice. The letter was addressed to a mutual friend in Eastbourne and said, "I'm about to take Charlie's life and also myself. We cannot live happily together." She asked that her father might defray her lodging expenses. The girl's father, Oscar Funnell, stated in evidence that when questioned, she said she was not sorry for what had happened and wished she had also died. Osborne, she said, locked the door, sat on her knee, and commenced singing the song "A Little More Work for the Undertaker." He then put his left arm around her neck, and with his right drew the revolver and fired at her once, and then at himself twice. He expired almost immediately. The coroner said the other letter contains some stupid verses in Osborne's handwriting. The medical witnesses conflicted in their theories as to who had fired the revolver. The medical opinions differ wildly. Although all agree that either Alice or Charlie could have fired the gun to shoot the other or themselves, they differ as to who is the most likely. One believes that they thought it might have been impossible for Charlie to have shot himself twice. Another states they did not believe that Alice would have been able to fling the revolver away from herself once she was shot. Whilst Alice is now conscious and able to speak, she refuses to give any details of the incident except to say that she was not sorry it had happened and only wished that she had also died. The jury, from the confusing testimony, are uncertain who is responsible. If it had indeed been a lover's pact, Alice Fennell would be held responsible before the law. From the Western Daily Press, the 13th of February 1902, the Eastbourne tragedy. At Eastbourne yesterday, the coroner resumed the inquiry into the circumstances attending the death of Lawrence Osborne, 19, who was found dead in a lodging house at Eastbourne on December the 12th with 2 bullet wounds in his chest. The deceased was resting against the knee of a young woman. The girl had been shot in the breast and so seriously injured that she was only able to leave the hospital a few days ago. The jury found that death was due to bullet wounds, but that the evidence was insufficient to show whether the wounds were inflicted by himself. 13 of the jury were of the opinion that the tragedy was the result of an agreement between Osborne and the young woman to die together. The coroner, who, summing up, had remarked that if the woman had agreed to die with the deceased or abetted him in killing himself, she would be guilty of murder in the eyes of the law. The case would now go to the assizes. Once somewhat recovered, Alice Fennell is brought to trial. Within the trial, the medical testimony remains conflicting. The main questions for the jury are: who shot whom? In essence, who was responsible? Was this a couple suicide pact? Alice vehemently refutes that there was a suicide pact in place, but beyond that, she has nothing to say. From the Derby Daily Telegraph, the 20th of February 1902, the Eastbourne tragedy. The trial of Alice Fennell on the charge of murdering her sweetheart, Lawrence Osborne, at Eastbourne was continued at Sussex Assizes on Wednesday. The deceased was found dead with his head on the knee of the girl, who herself was severely wounded, the revolver lying close by. The suggestion was that the couple had agreed to die together, but the accused had denied this. The medical evidence on Wednesday was of inconclusive character, one doctor stating that the wounds could have been caused by either the deceased or the prisoner. Another deposed that it was very unlikely the woman could have thrown the revolver to the spot where it was found, while a third expressed the opinion that the girl could have thrown the weapon away after receiving her wound. After deliberating half an hour, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty, and the prisoner was at once discharged. Alice Fennell does not make the news after the acquittal, and the question still remains: who had killed Charlie?
Case 6. The New Cross poisoning mystery. Love, lies, and 2 bodies in one room. A true crime from 1890. In this case, we are in Deptford in 1890, where a doctor's domestic life was shattered in the most shocking way imaginable. 2 bodies, a married woman and her close friend, a young medical assistant, were found fully dressed, side by side, in a bedroom, the air still heavy with the bitter almond smell of prussic acid. Were they lovers who chose to die together? Were they driven to despair by the pressures of an unwanted move across the Atlantic, or was something else responsible? Because as investigators pressed deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. Scratches on a third man connected to the household, a suspicious death weeks earlier, and a husband who vanished just as the questions grew sharper. In this story, we unravel the New Cross poisoning mystery, a Victorian tragedy where love, loyalty, and death becomes impossibly tangled.
On the 2nd of August, moving men who had been hired to collect luggage from the Town's End address to take the items to the steamer bound for Virginia find the bodies of Emma Townsend and William de la Motte in her bedroom. The bodies are clothed, but there is a smell of prussic acid. Mr. Townsend is nowhere to be seen. Whether this was a suicide pact or murder would grip the headlines for weeks. Within this tragedy are a number of players. Mrs. Emma Townsend, 33, with 3 small children. She is known to have the occasional whiskey and water. Confidants refer to her despair at the prospect of moving to Virginia as per her husband's wishes. She has been married to Dr. Townsend for some 13 years. She is known to have remarked on her realization of not loving her husband and her necessity of wearing 2 faces. Dr. Townsend has had his medical practice for 8 to 9 years, but has decided that he will retire and move himself and his family to Virginia near his brother. No additional explanation is given for his reasons to make such a radical move. William de la Motte, 28, works as an assistant doctor in the local hospital. He is a good friend of both Dr. and Mrs. Townsend, but particularly Mrs. Townsend. It is said that he was always in their house. And Dr. Hart. Dr. Hart was a good friend of the Townsends, and on the 25th of June, some 5 weeks before the mysterious deaths of Emma Townsend and William de la Motte, Dr. Hart has an accident in the house of the Townsends. He is repaired and sent home, and at his home he shows scratches on his hand and face to his landlady. A few hours later, he is found dead in the lavatory. Dr. Hart's possible importance in this case is not revealed for some time. A few months prior to the tragedy, Dr. Townsend has decided to give up his practice in Deptford and move to Virginia, where his brother lived, to retire there. Emma, by all accounts, was distraught at the thought of leaving her home and didn't want to go. From the Bromsgrove and Droitwich Messenger, the 2nd of August, 1890. Terrible tragedy at New Cross. The London suburb of New Cross has been thrown into a state of horror and excitement by the gradual unfolding of the particulars of a romantic and mysterious tragedy which has all the appearance of being a double suicide. The story proves to be one of the simplest character in regard to its facts, but so far as the motives which led the 2 victims to the fateful act are concerned, it is only too probable that no amount of inquiry will ever completely reveal the secret. A newspaper representative, on applying for information to the well-known ship owners Messrs. Allen and Sons, Leadenhall Street, was courteously informed by Mr. Bonser, who is in charge of the passenger traffic, that some weeks ago Dr. Knowlson Townsend, a medical man who until recently had a good practice at New Cross, but who was about to take up his residence in the United States, had been engaged in his capacity of surgeon for the outward voyage of the Ludgate Hill, a splendid steamer of some 5,000 tons capacity, which was to sail on August the 2nd from London to Havre and then to New York. Dr. Townsend had engaged berths for his wife and 3 children by the same vessel. Nothing more was heard of the doctor until the next day, when the owners of the Ludgate Hill received a telegram from him stating simply that his wife was dead and that he could not now go out in the steamer. Mr. Bonser had communicated the address of a carman who had been ordered by Dr. Townsend to take a number of heavy packages from 168 Lewisham High Road, New Cross, and from 14 Park Road, and convey them to the steamer. The circumstance led to the discovery of the terrible occurrence. Mr. Greaves, the carman in question, produced an order partly printed and partly in the handwriting of Dr. Townsend, addressed to him at Abbott Road, Poplar, upon which he acted, and called up at once an intelligent-looking young man named Thomas Norris, who had executed the commission, and by whose means the mysterious occurrence had been brought to light. Norris's story is as follows. The Carman's story. I arrived at 14 Park Road, Amersham Road, to the address given, at about 7:30 on Friday night, and, on presenting Dr. Townsend's order, I was allowed to remove 2 or 3 heavy packages bearing the initials KT and the address Steamship, Ludgate Hill, Albert Dock. I was then informed that the remaining packages were in a bedroom adjoining. On entering, accompanied by a servant maid, I was astonished to see a lady fully dressed reclining on the bed, apparently asleep, and on the floor, near the head of the bed, a gentleman who also appeared to be sleeping. In the meantime, 2 little boys had found their way into the room, whom, after trying in vain to awaken the lady, whom they called Mamma, they tried to wake the gentleman, whom they believed to be shamming sleep, to amuse them, a thing he had often done before. Still, under the belief that it was all a piece of fun, continued Norris, the boys proposed to pull off Dr. Delamott's boots, that being the name they addressed him by. But the intelligent carman had noted a significant blue colour upon the cheeks of the prostrate man, and requesting the servant to stand by him, he found upon close examination that all signs of life had departed, and that, in fact, he was dead. He was next requested to try to arouse the lady, but upon her face observing the same strange colour, he demanded that a doctor should be at once sent for. His fears proved only too well founded. The lady was also dead. The evening. The servant then stated that the young gentleman and her mistress had passed the evening together in the intimate and friendly manner which had been the customary with them, and going into an adjoining room, the servant brought out 2 tumbler glasses, both smeared with some rather thick and whitish potion, which had a strong odour of almonds. I now became convinced, said the informant, that this was a case of poisoning, and gave up all idea of removing anything until the police as well as a doctor had been called in. Of course, I remained until the arrival of the police, giving to the inspector an account of what I had seen, and giving him my address, but not having myself seen the gentleman, Dr. Townsend, for whom I was removing the packages, I was not able to give any information as to his whereabouts. Townsend interviewed. A reporter has had an interview with Dr. Townsend, who appeared thoroughly broken down. He stated that on Friday afternoon of last week he left home, 14 Park Road, with the intention of completing the arrangements for his departure from England, and also of dining with a very old friend who was coming up from Pembroke Dock to see him. His wife, the now deceased Emma, who was then in the best of spirits, said she should not be able to meet him as she had an engagement. She, however, asked him for some money, and he jokingly doled it out to her, a sovereign at a time. It was arranged that they should be ready to catch the 9:10 train on Saturday morning from the local station, in order to reach the docks at about 11 o'clock. During the afternoon, Dr. Townsend also saw Delamotte, who appeared perfectly calm and collected as usual, and in no way behaved as if he was unsettled in his mind. After saying goodbye to his wife, Dr. Townsend left, and having fulfilled his engagements, returned about 10:30 at night. He was then horrified to hear from Dr. Ezard that Mrs. Townsend and Delamotte had been discovered dead, as already reported. Asked by the interviewer if he could in any way account for the sad occurrence, Dr. Townsend said he could not in the least. Although they were all friendly, he had, it is almost needless to say, no suspicion of his wife, and he could not even explain how it was they came to die under such circumstances. He added that the reason of his intending to leave for America was that he had sold his practice here and was going to join his brother. Statement by Dr. Ezard. In the course of an interview, Dr. Ezard, who is a friend of the Townsend family, expressed a wish to correct an already published version of the tragedy. Mr. Delamotte, who was of French extraction, but whose family had resided in this country for 2 generations, had been in practice in various parts of the country, and was believed to be a qualified medical man. He acted as assistant to a consulting physician in the city, and merely lodged in the New Cross neighbourhood. When Dr. Townsend disposed of his practice at 168 Lewisham High Road to Dr. Ezard, Mrs. Townsend and the 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all under the age of 10, took up their abode at 14 Park Road. But Dr. Townsend remained with Dr. Ezard for the purpose, it was explained, of introducing patients. He slept at Dr. Ezard's, although it is only a few minutes' walk from where Mrs. Townsend was lodging, and where she had 2 rooms, both fitted as bedrooms, one being used by the children and the other by herself. Delamotte, who was a friend of the family, frequently visited her. Indeed, those acquainted with them say that he was always in and out of the house, while the lady also had numerous other callers whom her husband met at his wife's abode. Dr. Townsend was at 14 Park Road on Friday afternoon, at which time Delamotte was also on a visit to the house. Dr. Townsend left at 2:30 in order to join some friends in town and make certain arrangements. Delamotte and Mrs. Townsend were then left alone together, and so far as can be gathered, nothing more was heard of them until shortly before 8 o'clock. One of the children went to the bedroom and there saw his mother lying on the bed, apparently asleep, while Delamotte, who had been assisting in the packaging up, was sitting upon a box, breathing heavily or gasping for breath. The child does not appear to have taken much notice of what he saw, for no alarm was given till 2 carmen, instructed by the agents of the vessel on board which the Townsends were going to embark, arrived at the house to convey away the luggage, some furniture and goods having previously been shipped. Mrs. Townsend and Delamotte were then seen to be dead, and in explanation of the position of the latter, he being found partly under the bed, it is supposed that he fell off the box and that his body rolled some little distance. They were both completely dressed. The police were informed, and Dr. Ezard was called in while messengers were sent in quest of Dr. Townsend. Dr. Townsend's whereabouts. When he left home in the afternoon, it was undecided whether he would sleep on board that night, and Dr. Ezard proceeded to the house of a mutual friend at New Cross, where it was expected that Dr. Townsend would call in the evening of his not joining the ship. Dr. Townsend called there, and the dreadful news was broken to him by the other medical man. Dr. Ezard says the intelligence completely paralysed him. Dr. Townsend did visit his wife's remains, but stayed for the night with some friends in the neighbourhood. Dr. Ezard states that for a week, Dr. and Mrs. Townsend were his guests, and they always appeared to be on the most affectionate terms. Dr. Ezard declined to say anything upon the medical aspect of the case before the post-mortem had been concluded, and at the same time he expressed the view that the case of Mrs. Townsend's is a typical poisoning case. At present, however, there are no signs of poisoning about Delamotte, and his death may otherwise be accounted for. Dr. Ezard, in the interview referred to, said that the affair had been described in print as a crime, but, he added, there was no evidence of a crime having been committed. Neither was there anything to suggest that any impropriety had taken place. He declined to say whether any vessel containing poison was found in the room, and the police are equally reticent upon this as upon all other points connected to the mystery. The inquest. The two bodies having been removed to the mortuary at St. Paul's in Deptford, the opening of the inquest was fixed for Saturday by the coroner, Mr. Carter, and a jury was empanelled and sworn in at the Brown Bear, High Street in vicinity. The jury, having viewed the bodies, the coroner addressing them said that he only proposed to take formal evidence of identification and to examine the medical man called in. The witness called was Dr. Nolson Towson, surgeon, who gave his address at 168 Lewisham. He said, "The female deceased was my wife. Her name was Emma Maria Louise Townsend. She was 33 last birthday. She had not been ailing of late. I was about to proceed to America with my wife and family, and I know none of the circumstances attending her death of my own knowledge. I last saw her alive at 14 Park Road, New Cross, at about 3 o'clock yesterday, Friday afternoon. She was stopping there pending our sailing for America." Dr. Peter William Delamotte said, "I am a medical practitioner and reside at Staines in Middlesex. I have seen the bodies in the mortuary, and I identified the male deceased as my brother, William Delamotte. He was about 28 last birthday. He was a student in the London hospital. I did not know where he resided till this morning. I understand he lived at 217 New Cross Road. I last saw him alive about a year ago. I know none of the circumstances attending the case. I have known nothing of him since I saw him a year ago. On the expressed wish of the jury, it was decided that a post-mortem examination should be made by Dr. Forsyth of Greenwich, and the inquest was adjourned to August the 11th. The house occupied by Dr. Townsend in Lewisham Road is at the corner of Wickham Terrace and Manor Road, and separated from the main road by a walled-in shrubbery. Dr. Townsend has been in practice there over 8 or 9 years, and has been married about 13 years. He was well known in the neighbourhood, and was a prominent witness at the Old Bailey a few months ago at the acquittal of a Greenwich doctor charged with causing the death of a married woman named Tebbit, who was one of Dr. Townsend's patients. Investigations ensue as the police attempt to unravel what happened, and the burning question, was this a suicide or murder? From the Taunton Courier, the 13th of August 1890. The New Cross Tragedy. The inquest on the bodies of Mrs. Townsend and Mr. Delamotte was resumed and concluded at Deptford on Monday. The medical evidence was that the deaths were caused by prussic acid, and a chemist spoke to Mrs. Townsend, having purchased some of the poison from him. Mrs. Pierce, wife of a builder at West Ham, said she had met Mrs. Townsend at the London Bridge station and other places, and she had seen her meet a gentleman who went into a London hospital. The deceased told Mrs. Pierce that she had put on two faces, and she asked the witness to hide her for 5 days, as her husband was going abroad, and she found that she could not go. The jury found that the deaths were caused by poison, but how it was administered, there was no evidence to show, returning an open verdict after nearly an hour's deliberation. Friends are traced of Mrs. Townsend in the hope of getting a clearer idea of her state of mind. From the Worcestershire Chronicle, the 16th of August, 1890. The New Cross tragedy. Disclosures at the inquest. Disclosures at the inquest. On Monday, the inquest touched the death of Mrs. Emma Maria Townsend and William Delamotte, who were found dead at New Cross, was resumed at Deptford. Dr. Townsend said he could not account for his wife's death. She appeared until quite recently ready to go to America. Witness had every confidence in Delamotte's character, and on the day of the tragedy, Delamotte promised to see them off to the ship. He confirms that he was at a dinner party the night of the tragedy. The purchase of prussic acid. Evidence having been given to the circumstances under which the deceased were found, Henry R. Hay, a chemist in the New Cross Road, said he knew Mrs. Townsend by sight. He last saw her alive on August the 4th, shortly after 5. He states, "She came into my shop and asked for some prussic acid for Dr. Townsend, mentioning him by name. I said I did not care to serve her, but that if I did, it would have to be entered in the poison book. She said she was a doctor's wife and would sign the poison book. I then produced the poison book and began to make the entry produced. I asked her what she wanted it for. She said she wanted it to poison a dog. I said I would go round to the house and do it for her. She replied, no. I then asked her to bring the dog round to me, but she again said, no. I told her it was more than my business was worth to let her have it, and she went out of the shop. She was in the shop about 10 minutes. She did not return, and I did not see her again. She was rather cool. I noticed she smelt a little of alcohol." Police Constable Hayward, 412R, said he had been round to the chemist's shops in the district, but could find no evidence to the way which the prussic acid was obtained. Emma Townsend's state of mind. At Mr. Delamotte's rooms at 217 New Cross Road, he had found the following letter. Dear Dr. Delamotte, I'm just off to 14 Park Road, so after all I shall not be far from Hatcham House. The rooms do not look cheerful. I shall be at home, I mean there, this afternoon. Indeed, I am going there this morning. Come round and see me if you can. If you have nothing better to do, I expect K.R. will be around. I feel real miserable. Yours sincerely, Louisa Townsend. Elizabeth Pierce, wife of a builder living in Stratford, identified the following letter, which she said she had written to Mrs. Townsend. My dear friend, it is utterly impossible for me to comply with your request. Do, dear, consider and think before taking such a step. I do not wish you to pledge your things. Pay me when you can. Do not, for God's sake, dishonour yourself. He means you no good. See what I have come to. If you are in earnest, think better of it and go with Mr. T. He is yours after all. It is only the thoughts of a fool. Why forfeit honour and all? Do, dear, you will find a good friend there. I have if that will relieve you. Destroyed all letters, also the ticket. Send me a line. I will meet you at London Bridge any time you choose. Au revoir, chérie. Write as soon as possible to ever your friend, Lizzie. The witness said she first became acquainted with Mrs. Townsend some 5 years ago. They met at various places, generally at railway stations. She saw her in the East End on the 17th or 18 months ago. She had a gentleman with her. The gentleman went into the London hospital, and witness and Mrs. Townsend stayed together. She talked to me about her troubles, and I told her mine. I don't recollect, but something led me to remark to her, "Are you really married?" She replied, "I have to wear two faces," or words to that effect. I don't quite know if she said I have to wear two faces, or whether I have to put on two faces. She was not happy. I told her she ought to be happy, but she laughed it off, saying that she had found out that, instead of loving her husband as she thought she ought, she was not now sure of it at all. Mrs. Pierce continues, "The last I saw her was at London Bridge Station about 3 weeks ago, when she asked me to let her hide in my house for 5 days. Her husband was going to leave England, and she did not want to go. I tried to persuade her to go. The last letter she had from her was on the Thursday week, asking her to meet her at Deptford Station. Witness kept the appointment, but Mrs. Townsend did not." Post-mortem result. Dr. Alex Forsyth of Greenwich stated that he had made a post-mortem examination on both of the bodies. The liquid found in the bottle was prussic acid. In both bodies there was a strong indication of prussic acid, and he declared that both had died from prussic acid poisoning. The jury, after deliberating for 3/4 of an hour, returned a verdict in each case that the deceased died from prussic acid poisoning, but that how they came to swallow the drug there was not sufficient evidence to show. The inquiry lasted about 6 hours. The autopsy result, confirming that death was due to prussic acid, ensured that the deaths were due to poisoning. How the poison got into them remained the question. From the Tenbury Wells Advertiser, the 19th of August, 1890. The New Cross Mystery. Dr. Forsyth of Greenwich stated that he had found in one of the bottles handed him by the police 5 drops of prussic acid, which he had submitted to various tests. After making post-mortem examinations, he was convinced that in both instances death was due to prussic acid, which had saturated the whole of the system. The appearance of Mr. Delamotte's body differed from that of Mrs. Townsend's in 2 particulars. His abdomen was not distended with gas like hers, but was contracted, and in his case the lividity on the surface of the body was not so strongly marked. He should think that Delamotte had taken a larger dose of poison than Mrs. Townsend. 1/6 of the 3-ounce bottle produced would be sufficient to kill 2 persons. If possible, acid were given secretly in whisky, it might be detected, but not until a mouthful had been taken. Dr. Ezard and Dr. Short corroborated the statements of Dr. Forsyth, after which Mr. A. Oxley of Epsom gave evidence as to being in Mr. Hayes' shop should prussic acid was asked for by Mrs. Townsend. Mr. Catar then detailed the chief facts which had been elicited during the inquiry, and saw it would be for the jury to say whether they thought death had occurred through accident or design, and in the latter case whether death was occasioned by suicide or murder. It was clear at any rate that Mrs. Townsend did not require the prussic acid she attempted to buy for any legitimate purpose. They had heard the evidence of Mrs. Pierce asked to a sad history. The jury then conferred together, and by their verdict, after deliberating for nearly half an hour, found that the deaths of both Mrs. Townsend and Mr. Delamotte were due to poisoning by prussic acid, but as to how it came to be administered, they considered there was not sufficient evidence to show. Now the case came to a standstill. With the evidence collected, it is assumed that this was a case of suicide, yet there was unease about the lack of absolute proof. Then, unexpectedly, the case of Dr. Hart arises. Dr. Hart, who had been at the Townsend home a few hours before his unexpected death on the 25th of June, and with the clear scratch marks on his body, died some 5 weeks before the poisoning tragedy, and Dr. Townsend had signed the death certificate. Questions are asked with an inquest to take place as well as an exhumation. Dr. Townsend, as the medical professional who signed the death certificate, is looked for, but he has vanished. From the Bradford Daily Telegraph, the 22nd of August, 1890, the New Cross Mystery. According to present arrangements, the body of Dr. Hart will be exhumed on Saturday. The coffin will be deposited in the mortuary, and early on Monday morning the lid is to be removed to enable the coroner's jury to view the body. The autopsy will then be conducted. The local police are making inquiries in all directions for Dr. Townsend, but he cannot be heard of. The house in which he resided is shut up, and he has left no address behind. It appears that Dr. Townsend was at 14 Park Road with his wife on the evening that Dr. Hart received his injuries there. It seems that Dr. Townsend, who gave the burial certificate, did not know of the accident to Dr. Hart, and in this certificate ascribing death to syncope, the sudden loss of consciousness, without stating any further particulars. This gentleman, Dr. Townsend, is to be summoned at the inquest. Dr. Forster, who was called in to see Dr. Hart after what is supposed to have been his accident, did not remain with the patient, as Dr. Townsend was already there. Dr. Hart was driven home at about 3 in the morning, and a few hours after he received his injuries, and the police are searching for the driver of the cab in which he was conveyed to his lodgings. The exhumation and autopsy is held. A contusion is found with internal hemorrhaging, but how this happened remains an open verdict. There is no sign of poison. As for Dr. Knowlson Townsend, he seems to have done his best to stay out of the limelight. He quickly remarries in what was considered an indecent amount of time due to his not waiting the full expected years of mourning, to a doctor's daughter, Mary Jane Coutts. He died shortly afterwards in 1891 in Salford in England. The cases of his wife Emma Townsend and William Delamotte and Dr. Hart remained unsatisfactorily explained, but no further investigations were pursued.
Cases 7 and 8, Crimes of Passion and the Unwritten Law, two sensational trials that shook 1920s Europe. In this next story, we turn to two extraordinary trials from the early 1920s, cases where juries were asked to look beyond the letter of the law and into the human heart. Our first case takes us to Bordeaux in 1922, where Madame Perron, a celebrated actress, shot her unfaithful husband in broad daylight after discovering he had set up home with another woman. In France, the idea of justifiable vengeance still held cultural weight, and her trial became a theatre of passion, jealousy, and dramatic accusation. Incredibly, the jury acquitted her under what the newspapers called the unwritten law. 4 years later in Canterbury, the same idea resurfaced, but with a very different outcome. Two wealthy Etonians and one woman stood at the centre of a volatile love triangle that ended in a fatal shooting at a seaside villa. Letters full of obsession and resentment, a forged telegram, a borrowed revolver, and an ailing Sir Edward Marshall Hall in one of his final performances all played their part in a courtroom drama that transfixed Britain. Both cases asked the same question. When love is betrayed, can homicide ever be justified? These are the remarkable stories of jealousy, honour, and the so-called unwritten law.
Madame Perron. It is 1922 in Bordeaux, France, and Gabrielle Perron, a well-known actress and singer, is being cheated on by her husband, Louis Perron, the director of the Grand Theatre in Bordeaux. This story crossed the pond, so to speak, sparking interest with the English public, where such displays of violent passion are usually not so public. We start with this news article from an English news correspondent at the trial. From the Illustrated Police News, the 9th of March 1922, actress wife's terrible ordeal, tragedy of love, passion and jealousy. Never was a tale of romantic jealousy caused by a husband's infidelity more dramatically told than in a Bordeaux assize court by pretty, black-haired Madame Perron, well-known as a singer and an actress on the Paris stage, who recently shot her husband, the director of a Bordeaux theatre. An impressionable jury gave her the benefit of the unwritten law and acquitted her. Madame Perron made a love match with her husband just before the war. "I love him so," was her most frequent interruption as she sat with a long black widow's veil in the dock. "We were so happy with our 2 children," she said, giving evidence, "but one day my husband paid a fatal visit with his company to Dijon. There he met Mademoiselle Guy, daughter of the director of that theatre, and fell in love with her. She used to come to our lodgings and play with my children," wept the accused woman, "and I never dreamt she was already my husband's mistress." When, however, we returned to our home in Bordeaux, I learnt that Mademoiselle Guy had followed us and that my husband had found her an apartment just opposite our house. She gave birth to a little boy. After a few months of this life, I felt I could not stand it, and I decided to visit Mademoiselle Guy and ask her to go away and not to ruin the happiness of my home. That woman, and Madame Perron pointed to the figure of Mademoiselle Guy, who was sitting, also clad in a widow's veils, in the well of the court, had the effrontery when my husband came into the room, there in front of my face, to go up to him and throw her arms around him to kiss him. I was mad, and I hit her. I hit her again, twice, when I saw her walking out with my husband in the streets. Finally, finding that all my protests and even the scandal I made by these repeated scenes in vain, I made one last appeal to the husband I loved. He stood at the door of my house that fatal Sunday morning. He had just come back from church with his mistress. He told me he was going to leave me forever. He called on both my children to accompany him. He was infatuated by that woman. And again Madame Perron stood up and, sweeping her black veil aside, pointing an accusing finger at Mademoiselle Guy, who was now crouching and weeping. Continuing, she said, "My children cried and begged him to stay, saying they would not leave their mother. He pushed them aside and started to walk away. I felt in my vanity bag and pulled out a little pistol I always carried loaded. I pressed the trigger and fired 3 times, and my husband fell dead." There was a long pause after witness said this. "Did you mean to kill or to wound or frighten him?" suggested her counsel. With almost a shriek of passion, Madame Perron replied, "I could not see him love another woman. I ought to have shot her, but the pistol was in my hand and I fired. That is all I have to say." The English were dumbfounded that she could have been acquitted completely through the use of the unwritten law. It was just deemed astonishing. From the Nottingham Evening Post, the 6th of March, 1922. The unwritten law. The unwritten law has again been invoked at Bordeaux. Madame Perron, an actress and the widow of the former director of the Grand Theatre there, has been unanimously acquitted on a charge of having murdered her husband in a fit of jealous rage. The facts of the case were not in dispute. A lady, whose acquaintance Monsieur Perron had made during the war, she nursed him when he was ill and became his mistress, and after qualifying as a dentist, was provided by him with a flat in Bordeaux, quite close to the house in which he lived with his wife. Last November, Madame Perron, after threatening and striking her husband's mistress with a revolver, met him during one of his infrequent visits to her home and shot him dead. Her trial resolved itself less into a judicial examination of the facts than into a discussion of the characters of the 2 women and the murdered men. Some witnesses declared that Madame Perron cared less for her husband and children than for her stage success. Witnesses for Madame Perron, the chief amongst them, was Mademoiselle Marcelle Demargot, a well-known opera star and sister of the accused, bore testimony to Madame Perron's great devotion to her children and love for her husband. In spite of an appeal by counsel for the prosecution, who himself advocated leniency, the jury chose not to follow the example 3 previous Bordeaux juries by giving a verdict of acquittal in the full face of the facts. Madame Perron was found not guilty after a moving plea from her defender, who asked for her release because she was a good mother. 4 years later, a love triangle that ends in murder, invoking the unwritten law as a defence, took place in 1926 in Canterbury. The case involves 2 wealthy married men who have both attended Eton and Cambridge, and the wife of one of them. The background. The participants of this tragedy are John Derham, a well-known international hockey player. Derham is married but estranged from his wife. They live apart. Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Alfonso Smith inherited $500,000 from his Canadian grandfathers. He and his wife live at Herne Bay, and it is here that they make the acquaintance of the dashing sports figure Mr. John Derham, sometime in December 1925. The Smiths have 3 children. An intimacy develops between Mr. Derham and Mrs. Smith, which Mr. Smith becomes aware of. Smith's jealousy knows no bounds, and his anger is extreme towards Derham of having ruined his wife and ruined their marriage. In August 1926, Mrs. Smith is staying with her sister, Miss Wright, at the Villa Stella Maris on the Kent coast in the town of Whitstable. The upset from Smith has, over the 8 months of his wife's relationship with Derham, become an obsession, although, strangely, it is reported that he is on good terms with his wife. A steady stream of volatile letters between Mr. Smith and Mr. Derham show the frantic nature of Smith's jealousy. A trap is laid by Smith with a telegram forged as his wife, requesting Derham to visit her at the Villa Stella Maris. Smith has conveniently borrowed a revolver from a friend in the military. Not unexpectedly, the scene is set for murder. From the Daily Herald on the 4th of September 1926, One of Us Had to Go, the amazing court story of shot sportsman, triangle of tragedy. Ex-guards officer for trial on murder charge. Intensely dramatic evidence was given at Canterbury yesterday when Alfonso Francis Austin Smith, aged 37, formerly an officer in the 4th Dragoon Guards, who inherited a fortune of nearly $2 million from his grandfathers, the late Hugh Ryan and the late Sir Frank Smith, two Canadian magnates, was committed for trial at Maidstone Assizes, charged with the murder of John Adam Tyler Derham at Stella Maris, Tankerton, Whitstable on August the 12th. Mr. Derham was a well-known international hockey player and the grandson of the late Brigadier General Tyler, VC. Both Derham and Smith attended Eton and Cambridge. Mr. Sefton Cohen, for the prosecution, said that about last Christmas, when Smith and his wife were living in a flat at Herne Bay, Derham, a married man living apart from his wife, came to the house and became acquainted with them. Early in July, Smith became acutely jealous of his association with his wife, and on August the 9th, Smith arrived at Stella Maris, where Mrs. Smith was staying with her sister. Miss Wright stated that Smith appeared to be on good terms with his wife, and on the evening of the 12th, Miss Wright, passing the drawing room, saw Derham, Smith, and his wife, and the door was shut as she passed, but she heard the voices of all three loudly. Supper together. Derham subsequently came into the kitchen, and Smith, his wife, and Derham left the house together. After they left, Miss Wright saw that the drawing room was in disorder and that a table was lying with a leg broken. The three went to the Marine Hotel and had supper and a bottle of champagne, and shortly before 11 returned to Stella Maris. Mrs. Smith and her sister prepared a bed in the spare room for Derham, and the sister overheard Smith say, "I won't have this other lover of yours sleeping in this house." 20 minutes later, Miss Wright, from her bedroom, heard a bang. Running down, she saw Smith lying on the floor and Derham sitting across him, striking him. A builder living in Whitstable saw through the window two men and a woman standing in the room. The man nearest the woman made a sudden dash for the other man. There was a crash of glass, and the man in the corner was pushed against the window and appeared to be pulled to the floor. The man who made the rush struck at something on the floor. He got up and appeared to be pressing something to his stomach. A little later, Derham was found in front of the house. Three men, one of whom was the builder, went into the house. Smith was on the floor with wounds on his head. He said, "You three will make a good jury, and I know you will give an honest verdict. I loved my wife dearly. She invited him here. One of us had to go." Police must untangle the events of this dramatic and confusing scene. The four at the scene are Miss Wright, who is Mrs. Smith's sister, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Mr. John Derham. Although Mr. Derham was seen on top of Mr. Smith, hitting him with a pistol, it is actually Derham who is shot by Smith, eventually dying from his wounds. Mr. Smith, also hurt in the affray, easily recovers. There is no question as to who killed Derham, and Smith is arrested. An inquest is held to formally establish the facts of the case and who was responsible. From the Sheffield Independent on the 4th of September 1926. Charged with the murder of a wife's friend, despicable intrigue, revolver shots at villa, rich man sent for trial. Strong passages in letters written by a wealthy man to one whom he accused of an intrigue with his wife were quoted at Canterbury Police Court yesterday when Alfonso Francis Austin Smith, 37, was charged with the murder of John Adam Tyler Derham on the 12th of August by shooting him at Stella Maris, a house in St Anne's Road, Tankerton, in Whitstable. Both Smith and Derham went to Eton and Cambridge, and both served with distinction in the war. Derham, who was a well-known international hockey player, lived at Claverhouse near Herne Bay and was a grandson of the late Brigadier General Tyler, VC. Smith is the grandson of the late Sir Hugh Ryan and the late Sir Frank Smith, two prominent Canadian magnates from whom he inherited nearly $500,000. Derham died in a nursing home from a wound in the abdomen, and a letter Smith handed to the police said that Derham had come between him and his wife. Mr. Sefton Cohen, prosecutor on behalf of the Director of Public Prosecution, and Mr. F. Gills Kimber of London represented the accused. Acutely jealous. Mr. Cohen said that shortly before midnight on the 12th of August, Derham was found on the pavement outside the house, Stella Maris, suffering from a bullet wound in the abdomen. He died the following day. The accused, Alfonso Smith, was arrested and charged with murder. The accused was a married, independent man living with his wife and children. Last Christmas, he and his wife were living in a small flat at Herne Bay, and there Derham became acquainted with them. Derham was a married man living apart from his wife. He was 40 years of age and also, evidently, of independent means. In the early part of July, accused appeared to have become acutely jealous of Derham's association with his wife. On the 14th of July, he went to Derham's address at Cricklewood Hill, London, and in Mr. Derham's absence took 2 photographs of his, Smith's, wife that he found there. On the following day, the accused went to Claverhouse. Miss Lily Wright, sister of Mrs. Smith, went to Stella Maris and was there at the house on the day of the tragedy. As the tension of the crime to come builds, Mrs. Smith and her sister find a revolver stashed away in the villa. To put it out of commission, Mrs. Smith holds the revolver under running water for several minutes. The water has no impact at all on the revolver's functionality. From the Sheffield Independent on the 4th of September 1926. revolver incident. On the 10th of August, a revolver was found in a coal scuttle at Stella Maris and was hidden in a glove box. Later, it was found in the kitchen, and the accused wife, Mrs. Smith, held it under a running tap, presumably, said Mr. Cohen, to put it out of action. Of course, it had no such effect. The accused, Alphonso Smith, came on the scene and took possession of it. After the accused, his wife, and Derham had had their supper together at a hotel, returning to the house at about 11 p.m., the sister overheard the accused say, "I won't have the other lover of yours sleeping in this house." Soon afterwards, Miss Wright heard sounds of quarrelling, and afterwards the bang of a gun. She went downstairs and saw the accused lying on the floor, with Derham across him, striking him on the head and shoulders with something. Lily Wright, a pretty girl of 16, said she had stayed several minutes with Smith and her sister, and she had often seen the prisoner under the influence of drink. After describing how, after hearing a shot, she and her sister were trying to pull Derham away from Smith, who was lying on the drawing-room floor, witness said that she saw Derham open the door and stagger into the street. He was holding a revolver to his stomach at the time. Witness followed him out and she saw him fall down. She hid the revolver in the garden and later gave it to Inspector Rivers. Witness said that she did not notice what the accused did when she and her sister pulled Derham off him. Mr. Sefton Cohen read the letter Smith handed to the police. It was as follows: "My dear, dear girl, this problem can only be solved in one way: the removal of your lover Derham or myself. With the characteristic cowardice which that individual has shown throughout your mean and sordid intrigue, he removed himself from his rooms, fearing, I presume, the consequence of a visit from me. Whether he imagines he would have a comfortable second home in my house you live in and a mistress gratis on my money settled on you, or whether he thought that I, being out of the way, you would be an easy victim, I know not. But this I do know, that his pursuit of you, a young married woman with 3 children, babies, and a little money, knowing in full that marriage, he being already married, was impossible, was and is a despicable and damnable thing. Nor are you much less to blame with your constant lies and the enlistment of your reputable friends to cover up your affairs. One aspect that arises within the case is that Smith is heavily in debt. Derham is well off, both from family and his international sports career. The implication is that one reason his wife has begun relations with Derham is for money. The letters from Smith continue. From the Sheffield Independent on the 4th of September 1926. Too mean and disgusting. I was hard up, and you had his car. A life for a Morris Cowley, in your opinion, is a fair exchange. Your honour seems to have counted for nothing. I helped you in every way, and you asked the man with you to my home, rode in his car, and no doubt let Derham pay for your drink. The whole thing is too mean and too disgusting for me. I cannot, while I live, and cannot go on supporting this great enemy of mind and heart. May God forgive me for what I am about to do, and may God forgive you, the cause of it all. As for your men, you will always have this between you, and if you can go on after it, there are no sentences in the language which could be construed to express what you both are. My will is at Wilkinson's. You have now £10,000 of mine, and after this £5,000, and other monies will be yours and the children's. I have no more to say. My heart is broken, and there is nothing in life for me. If you hold anything sacred in this world or in the next, look after the children. They and you, God help me, are my only regret. I still love you too much. Your husband, Frank. The letter read aloud at the inquest, that had been written by the prisoner Smith, was open for much interpretation. One meaning was that Smith was planning to kill Derham, and that is the take the prosecution took. The other possible meaning, as proposed by the defence, was that he intended to kill himself. With two possible interpretations, intense scrutiny was given to the build-up of the crime. One of the main sticking points was the telegram that was sent by Smith, feigning to be his wife, to Durham, begging him to visit her at Villa Stella Maris. From the Sheffield Independent on the 4th of September 1926, come down tonight. Counsel added that a telegram in the handwriting of the accused was handed in Whitstable Post Office early on the day of the tragedy and addressed to Durham and signed Kathleen. It stated, "Will you come down for a few hours tonight? Most urgent. Wire GPO, Whitstable, not house. Come house if not at station." Dr. Whitney said Smith's injuries were not very serious. Smith was suffering from the effects of drink. In the witness's opinion, the shot was not fired from close range. Friendly terms. Cross-examined, Miss White, the sister of Mrs. Smith, said the two standing together at the window were Mrs. Smith and the dead man. The first that she saw of the revolver was when Derham stood up with it in his hand. Derham was not pulled off Smith, but got up himself. Mary Wyatt, who was engaged by Mrs. Smith as the children's nurse, said Mrs. Smith and Derham appeared on friendly terms, and he called her Kathleen. On one occasion, Smith told her he loved his wife dearly and that Derham had stolen her from him, and he was going to smash everything belonging to Derham. He started to pull the pictures down and smash them. He said, added the children's nurse, that he would kill both Derham and his wife and would not mind if he was arrested. Borrowed revolver. On Monday the 9th of August, the accused, Alphonso Smith, asked his friend David Balfour to lend him a revolver. Witness lent him the revolver produced because accused said he was going to Ireland that night and wanted it for self-protection. He also borrowed 6 cartridges like those produced. More letters are produced by the prosecution showing the passionate jealousy and hatred Smith evinced for Derham. From the Sheffield Independent, the 4th of September 1926, The Guise of Friendship. Mr. Cohen read out these letters which Smith accused Derham of stealing his wife. In one dated July, he wrote, "For months, under the guise of friendship, you have sought to seduce my wife and wreck my home. You have been intriguing to bring about a separation." On the 18th of July, he wrote, "You have stolen my wife after eating bread. Don't leave blotting paper about saying very much in love, Jack." Writing from the Grosvenor Hotel, Smith again accused Derham of seducing his wife and told him not to think that he would get off lightly in the divorce court. He said, "You have taken my wife, but I have taken something of yours. Find it, you dirty, white-livered fool. You lied to me, and now By God, you will have to suffer. You have ruined not only a sweet girl, but the woman I love and not whom you love. If you really loved her, you could not have done this. Inspector Rivers from Whitstable gave evidence to the effect that he went to Stella Maris with police officers on the night of the 12th of August. Smith was certainly under the influence of liquor. When witness charged him with the attempted murder, he said, "I am not guilty," and subsequently, when charged with murder after the death of Derham, he made a similar reply. Alleged statement. Sergeant Quested of Whitstable said the accused told him, "I intended to shoot myself, but in the struggle for the revolver it went off and shot Derham." After a retirement by the magistrate, Mr. Charles Harvey said that there was no alternative except to commit the accused to the Kent Assizes on the murder charge. The accused, when asked if he had anything to say why he should not be committed, replied, "Nothing, except that I am not guilty." Smith was then committed to the next Kent Assizes. Alfonso Smith, although in debt, pooled enough money to buy the very best in legal defence. This included the ailing Sir Edward Marshall Hall. The defence cleverly used the letters, which could be read either as a threat of murder or as letters implying a suicide attempt to come. The gun accidentally went off, shooting Mr. Derham in the struggle to gain control of it, is one of the defence tacks. The trial. The courtroom was packed to watch the unfolding drama of an upper-class murder case involving the killing of a well-known international sports figure. From the Western Mail, the 26th of November 1926. No unwritten law. Jealousy discussed in murder trial. Triangle of two old Etonians and a woman. In this country there is no unwritten law. Our law does not accept that a man either has a good or a bad reason being jealous of another man. This was stated by Mr. Roland Oliver, KC, prosecuting on Thursday in what is known as the Stella Maris murder trial. Alfonso Francis Austin Smith, aged 37, educated at Beaumont, Eton and Cambridge, was charged with murdering John Adam Derham, also of Eton and Cambridge, at a house called Stella Maris at Whitstable on August the 12th. There was a secondary charge against Smith of being in possession of a Webley service revolver and 4 rounds of ammunition with intent to endanger life. In a packed courtroom court, Mr. Oliver declared that if Smith were found guilty, the jury would have no doubt that the motive was jealousy, whether just or unjust did not matter. Mrs. Smith, who had recently recovered from a severe illness, cannot, of course, be called by the prosecution to give evidence, and she was not present when the trial opened. There was an array of well-known counsel. Sir Edward Marshall Hall defended Smith. Mr. Oliver plunged at once into the facts of the case in opening for the Crown. At about 11:30 on August 12th last, a man named John Adam Derham was shot through the body in a house called Stella Maris with a revolver. It is your grave task to inquire whether the man in the dock, Alfonso Francis Austin Smith, is guilty of his murder. Unsigned separation deed. Outlining the history of the case, counsel went on to say how Smith had been living with his wife at various addresses at Herne Bay up to May. The evidence was that they got on fairly well but quarrelled sometimes. Counsel took the story up to June when he said the differences between Smith and his wife became acute. Toward the end of June, the prisoner left his home, went right away, and never returned to his wife again until August the 9th, which was a day or two prior to the tragedy. Derham continued to see the prisoner's wife while Smith was away, and during this time Mrs. Smith went to her solicitors and asked them to prepare a deed of separation, which was done. That document was found amongst the prisoner's possessions when he was arrested, but it had not been signed. Revolver in court. The next phase of counsel's opening took the scene to the little Villa Stella Maris at Whitstable, into which Mrs. Smith moved in August with her 3 young children and her sister Lily White, aged 16. Just about this time, Smith possessed himself of a revolver which he borrowed from a friend with the excuse that he was going to Ireland and wanted it for his protection. Then on August the 9th, Alphonso Smith arrived at the bungalow and stayed that night with his wife. They were apparently on amicable terms. On August the 10th, Mrs. Smith made some statement to her sister, and together they searched the house and found a revolver Smith had left. Decoy telegram. At 2 p.m. on August the 12th, Smith sent a telegram to which he drew the jury's most earnest attention because it was a factor of inestimable importance in this case. It was addressed to John Derham. The telegram was, "Will you come down for a few hours tonight to me? Urgent. Wire train, not house. Most urgent. Come to house if I am not at the station. Kathleen." Why did Smith send that telegram? He asked the jury to decide whether it was not a trap to get Derham to come. "You stole my wife." Counsel then read various letters written by the prisoner to Durham. One read, "Durham, you have endeavoured to, or have accomplished, to steal my wife. The answer is mine, and I will answer. Durham, you once remarked to me that all was fair in love and war, so blame only yourself for what has happened. You stole my wife after eating my bread. I retaliate in other ways." Another letter dated July 16th read, "You swine, I only wish you had the courage to meet me. You have seduced my wife, and for that you think that you will get off easily in the divorce court." Counsel described how on the night of the tragedy Mrs. Smith went to bed, leaving her husband and Derham together. She heard a shot and ran downstairs into the drawing room. There on the floor on his back was her husband, and over him, striking his face with something, obviously a revolver, was Derham. "I ask you to say," said counsel, "that Smith had shot Derham, and he had then sprung upon him to get the revolver away and was striking him on the head. Derham was taken to the hospital and within 24 hours was dead." The filled courtrooms eagerly followed the salacious story from the upper classes unfold before them. The use of what was normally a French line of defence of unwritten law was a bold move by the defence. Astonishingly, it worked. As Sir Hall dramatically read letters from Smith in which he begs his wife to return to him, one juror burst into tears. Sir Hall continues asking that the jury throw a lifebelt to Smith that his wife had refused him. This the jury does by acquitting him, much to the indignation of Judge Avery. From the Sheffield Daily Telegraph, 29th of November 1926. Stella Maris drama, Smith acquitted on capital charge. Scenes in court. Judge and the unwritten law. After a trial lasting for 3 days, Alfonso Francis Austin Smith was at the Kent Assizes at Maidstone on Saturday found not guilty of the murder of John Adam Tyler Derham, a well-known international hockey player, at a house called Stella Maris at Whitstable. Smith pleaded guilty to a charge of possessing firearms with intent to endanger life, and Mr. Justice Avery passing a sentence of 12 months hard labour, remarking, "The jury have taken upon your trial the most lenient view that was possible of this case." The judge summed up for an hour and 35 minutes, and the jury were absent for 2 hours and 10 minutes considering their verdict. When the jury returned their verdict, there was an immediate outburst of hand clapping and cheering from all over the court, which was promptly suppressed by the police on duty. Smith heard his sentence without saying a word, and after glaring fiercely at the judge, walked once from the docks to the cells. To the end of the trial, Smith showed no sign of the suspense through which he had passed. Mrs. Smith, who was not in court when the verdict was announced, stated on hearing it, "Oh, that's splendid. I had a wonderful letter from my husband this morning. This, of course, will mean that we shall come together again." Mrs. Derham stated afterwards, "I am very glad that another life has not been lost by this terrible business." Nothing but approval of the verdict could be heard in the conversations of the crowd assembled outside the court. The Sheffield Daily Telegraph is informed authoritatively that it is almost certain that no appeal will be made against the sentence. The defence contended that the telegram was not a trap, that Smith deliberately contemplated suicide, and that the fatal shot was fired during a struggle between him and Derham for the possession of the revolver with which Smith contemplated killing himself. A remarkable case of the unwritten law, successfully used as a defence in an English court, and also a fine example of the brilliance of Sir Edward Marshall Hall. Some additional features of the case. The appearance of the revolver during the incident was vague. It was stated that a game of cards had been suggested and that Smith had produced the gun at its onset. The appearance of the gun was then misinterpreted as a threat, and a struggle ensued for the gun, resulting in the accidental shooting of Derham. Mr. Justice Avery was very angry at the acquittal and threw the full weight of the law on Smith at the sentencing regarding the possession of a firearm to commit bodily harm, with 12 months hard labour. Smith himself was in tremendous debt, despite the hefty inheritance he had been given. He died in 1944, impoverished.
And that, I suspect, is my cue. The gentle patter of rain on the window, which is a polite way of reminding me that the hour is getting on and sensible people have already gone to bed. If you've enjoyed tonight's wander through the darker corners of history, please do click anything clickable. It lets Mr. Algorithm know we're worth showing to other lovers of Victorian and Edwardian true crime. Every little nudge helps us to find new, curious minds. And if you'd like even more stories, early releases, the full archive, and our extra monthly pieces, you can join us on Patreon for only £5 a month. It's a lovely way to dive deeper into the cases we can't quite fit on YouTube. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, teller of tales collector of Victorian brollies and part-time wrangler of unruly archives, wishing you a warm, peaceful night. Until our next story.